The Westerlands and Iron Islands have fallen, only Casterly Rock remains. My throne is secure, my army well stocked and provisioned, and we were on a verge of signing a peace treaty that will officially end a conflict that was, to all extents and purposes, over with the death of Tywin Lannister. Here the king's eye narrowed. Now though the war may begin again. How so, your grace? Brian asked, startled. Another war? Hasn't the realm been through enough? Look before you, Brian, the king commanded. Tell me what you see. What can I say? I see King's Landing in flames, your grace. Brian said helplessly. Exactly. In flames. Fire being the weapon of the Targaryens. There are those that say that the dragons started this fire. That the Targaryens have exacted punishment for the Faith's attempts to curb their power. The king's voice became cold. It wouldn't be the first time they've used fire to deal with their enemies. His grandfather. Your grace, I don't believe that allegation to be true, Brian protested. Gods make me more eloquent than I feel. I have no talent for this kind of talk. The explosion in the Great September came from beneath us. If it had been the work of dragons, it would have come from above. She thought quickly. Also Lord Willers said the fire was likely the work of wildfire rather than normal incendiaries. The flames were green and acted as wildfire is reported to have done in the past. Wildfire, the king snorted, also a Targaryen weapon. His face tightened. First, Joffrey and Tommen die in suspicious circumstances. Then the September is destroyed in a torrent of fire, most likely killing Myrcella and Cersei. I had no love for the former queen nor Joffrey, but the two children were innocent. I will not have my name on a piece of paper next to child killers and murderers. If they did destroy the September, then any talk of an alliance is over. Gods help me. Your grace, enough, Brian, the king said, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. He paused, closing his eyes as if in pain. If anyone had told me the burden of being king, I would never have accepted it. He opened his eyes and gave her a sad smile. My apologies, the wine has made me melancholy. Unlikely, by my count he had no more than 3 goblets. I am tired and want to see my son and wife before sleep takes me. He looked towards the fires. Though you are right, I should not allow myself to be put off by the Targaryens. I will consult with the Grand Maester to see if more aid can be given to the people of the city. Simply because Daenerys and Aegon refuse to accept my assistance doesn't mean we cannot help in other ways. They walked in troubled silence towards the palisade. They passed 2 more guards as they entered the enclosure and headed to the command tent. With a smile of dismissal, the king stepped inside. A few moments later she heard soft voices talking. It appeared the queen was awake and wanted her husband to fill her in on the events of the feast. Hoping that talking to his wife would soothe the king's troubled mind, she turned away. Brian nodded once to the guards at the tent entrance and started to retrace her steps back to the feast pavilion. If she had the time right, she knew that the enclosure guards would shortly be changed, the current watch going off duty and, belatedly, joining the feast as it was almost at its end. She left the palisade behind her, exchanging a salute and a few words with the Wolf's guards on duty by the gateway. While the men were curious and exact in their report, Brian couldn't help but notice that there was an edge of impatience to their tone. They too want to partake in the drinking, or perhaps just get some rest. Brian left the men and walked on towards the feast tent. She made a wide circuit of the tent to clear her head and ponder through her troubled thoughts. Will it really come to war again? The thought concerned her more than she liked to admit. When she was young she yearned for knightly valor, but now, older and more experienced, she knew the cruel cost of conflict and realized now that only a fool would wish for it. As she approached the wide entrance to the feast tent, she saw 3 figures emerging from the opening. Lady Sansa, she gave a perfunctory bow. I hope you have had a pleasant evening. Oh yes, the king's sister gushed as she clasped the arm of Gullen Tyrell, who had escorted her from the feast along with his brother, Willers. The knight had lifted his 2 swords from a peg erected near the tent entrance and was strapping them to his hips as he walked. It has been a wonderful night. She seems like a simple girl with nothing in her head but air. I sometimes have trouble imagining this is Lady Catelyn's daughter. Brian gave a concerned smile. Are you retiring for the night, my lady? I am indeed, Sansa replied, all smiles and grace. Sir Gullen has offered to escort me to my tent. The warrior woman turned to look at the knight, her second within the Wolf Guard. That was very noble of you, sir. She frowned, but where are the lady's protectors? I haven't been able to find either of them. The middle son of Mace Tyrell chuckled wryly. I fear that they have been distracted by the festivities, my lady. They are probably lying around here somewhere, the worse for drink. A spark of anger flared from within Brian. Outrageous. The men were both members of the Wolf Guard. They should have been here, ready and waiting to protect Lady Sangza as befits a member of the royal family. I'll have their badges for this. Garland saw her expression. He nodded towards his brother. In truth, it is no hardship for us, my lady. We have to pass by the Lady Sangza's tent on our way back to the Tyrell camp. He laughed suddenly. Nor are we in any rush. Our tents are next to our grandmother's. She snores like the hounds of hell. Sangza giggled politely at the jest, but Willers Tyrell, who had limped to stand alongside his brother, observed the commander's concern. This dereliction of duty is of a particular worry to you, Brian. It should be to us all, my lord. Brian said absently, forgetting for a moment that Willers was content for her to call him by his name rather than his title. Surely, given the reason for tonight's festivities, such things can be forgiven. Willers said reasonably. Lapses of duty can never be forgiven, Brian responded firmly. She looked across at Sangza and Garland. If you'll permit me, I will come with you both and ensure that a guard is set on my lady's tent. As my lady wishes, Garland said nobly as he escorted Lady Sangza towards the line of tents that housed the army. By virtue of her birth, Sangza's tent was near her mother's in the section of the camp reserved for northerners. It was, by far, the smallest faction of the army. Lord Eddard had taken the vast bulk of the northern host home to fight the invaders and rebels. They settled into a pattern, Garland and Sangza up front with Willers and Brian bringing up the rear. As they walked, Sangza attempted to lighten the mood. I am so grateful that you offered to escort me, Sir Garland. I feared Sir Horace was going to offer when we saw the guards were absent. Would that have been so terrible? Lord Redwine's son has seen a great deal of combat. He comes from noble stock. Oh, but he is too dull. Sangza giggled again, goes on and on about how he and his brother both aspire to inherit from their father. He is pleasant enough but too serious. I fear he hopes that I might grant him my favor in the upcoming tourney to celebrate the prince's birth. And my lady would deny him that honor. Garland asked with mild reproof, why would you be so cruel? My favor will go to one man, Sangza declared, suddenly serious, and one man only. As fortunate a man as any in the 7 kingdoms, my lady, Garland replied with a charming smile. Disarmed, Sangza laughed. She stepped in close. My apologies, Sir Garland. I am being indiscreet. I hope you will keep my secret. I will guard it with my life, my lady. Garland answered firmly, though his eyes and voice were light with gently mockery. Not even my own wife shall know. I have heard tell of the Lady Leonette from your grandmother. Sangza spoke. Tell me about your lady wife, Sir Garland. As the two had conversed over the new topic, Brian found herself thinking over what Sangza had said. Any desire Sangza might have for a potential suitor was likely to be of great interest to the Lady Caitlin and King Rob. I wonder who the Lady Sangza is speaking of. Brian muttered. Willers chuckled. I suspect that the honor of being the recipient of Lady Sangza's affections belongs to the new Lord of the Vale. Harold Hardine. Brian asked, a little louder than she would have liked. Thankfully Sangza seemed so engrossed with hearing about Lady Leonette and life in Highgarden that she appeared to pay no mind to the people behind her. Why is that so surprising? Willers asked with a small smile on his face. Well, he's such a bully to Gendry for a start. Gendry? Willers seemed confused. I don't believe I've met anyone with that name. Brian cursed herself for her forgetfulness. My apologies. Gendry Waters is Lord Eddard's squire who came with him from King's Landing. A bastard. The squire to the Lord of Winterfell. He is an able lad, Brian said defensively, trained in the Vale by some of the best sword masters in the land. He even has a first sword of Bravos as a tutor. You mustn't think me biased, Willers assured her. Personally, I have always found the prejudice against those not born within the bounds of marriage to be quite absurd. That is one of the many reasons I have found Prince Oberyn's approach to life so refreshing. The man paused as he thought of his friend, as if wondering if he had made it out of the conflagration at the September. He shook himself. I am only surprised that the noble Lord Eddard, a man quite obsessed with honor, would take a bastard as his squire. If you only knew. You only have to look at the boy to know he has Baratheon blood in his veins. He has all of Renly's fine handsome features mixed with Robert's brute strength and savagery in a fight. I'm sure Lord Eddard has his reasons, Brian offered lamely. The man beside her gave her a wary glance before nodding as if the matter was of no importance. But of course. They rounded a corner and passed a small campfire outside a few tents. The fire had evidently been burning for some time, the flames were low, hissing and dying as the fuel was slowly used up. The area was strewn with a number of sleeping figures, the men having fallen into a stupor after an excessive bout of drinking. The only one still standing was a large figure propped against a tent pole, humming softly as he downed a flagon of ale. From the look on his face, not to mention the veritable graveyard of tankards littering the ground, this was by no means the first ale the man had had. Clegane. Brian muttered darkly. I should have thought to find out around such slovenliness. Fuck's sake. The giant hissed as he threw away the now empty flagon. Can't a man drink in peace? I came away from the feast to get away from people's nagging. Sadly you seem to have not come far enough. Willers observed as he leaned on his cane. You don't say. The hound looked about him. Fuck. Who's gonna pay me now these cunts have fallen asleep? Pay. Stupid bastards bet me I couldn't outdrink them. Sandor Clegane gave a rare smile as he looked about him. Looks like I win. And yet now there is no one to pay you your winnings. Willers noted, a sympathetic smile crossed his face. No bother. The hound pushed himself to his feet. He swayed slightly. I'll just go through their pockets. They'll give me what's mine. Brian stepped forward. You will not rob these men. It's not robbery, Clegane spat, just me taking my winnings. You can do that in the morning, Brian stated as she put a hand on the man's chest. She gently pushed him away from the drunken fools at her feet. You shall not take their money while they are unconscious. The hound glowered at her, but they were interrupted by Garland's arrival. Clearly he had circled back to see what the trouble was. Are you in need of assistance, my lady? No, thank you, Sir Garland. Brian did not move her gaze from the hound. Sandor and I were just debating whether he should go to sleep. Besides, you've won nothing, Clegane. A voice sounded from Brian. One of the men, she though insensate, had crawled to his knees and was looking blearily at the larger man. I'm still awake. She stared at the man, spying the silver badge of honor that hung loosely from the man's doublet. Harrod, Brian said as examined the men who had been drinking with the hound. I thought you among those taking the late watch tonight. She was beside herself. You can't guard the king in this condition. No, milady, the man protested indignantly from his place on the ground. I'm not on duty tonight. I was told that I wasn't needed and could join the lads. Who told you? Brian asked disbelievingly. I distinctly remember a watch list being given to me at dawn, a list with your name on it. The man seemed to struggle with such a complicated notions. No, no, my lady. The man's face contorted as the idea that he may be in trouble seemed to permeate his mind. It went round the others that we weren't needed tonight and that we should report at sunup. You'd still be useless as a protector. Brian was about to savage the man when a thought occurred to her. What others? Harrod gestured around himself. Well, the boys here for a start. Brian looked left and right, stooping to examine the faces of the men unconscious on the ground around her. She quickly confirmed that the men, people she had dismissed as common soldiers, were in face all members of the Wolf Guard. Many of whom should have been on duty that evening. Harrod, she said sharply, I need you to think. Who told you not to report for duty? The man's face was befuddled. Well, I don't rightly remember, my lady. The word just reached us that we weren't needed. And there were 10 casks of ale in the Wolf Guard tent for us to share in. Brian shook her head. It was probably nothing, just a change in orders that had not been relayed to her. Though this thought was scant comfort to her. As commander of the Wolf Guard, she should have been notified of any changes. Willers was looking intently at her. We should check on the king and queen, he advised firmly. Garland looked at them both. Come now, the guards won't go off duty until their relief arrives. They know better than that. Ordinarily Brian would have agreed, but something felt wrong here. She drew up, her mind decided. I'll got back to the enclosure. To be sure all is well. I'll go as well, Garland stated, stepping towards her. Brian looked over his shoulder. What of Lady Sansa? The girl was looking confusedly at them all. Plainly the girl had no notion of what was going on. Willers Tyrell straightened. "I will see her safely to her tent and fetch guards for her. You both should go now. It's probably nothing but best to be sure." "As you say, my lord." Brian turned to go, but a guttural cry of frustration drew her attention. "Fucking hell." The hound gathered himself, reaching down to pick his massive broadsword up from the ground where he had left it when he had started his drinking session. "Can't let you fuckers go into danger without me. You can't fight Clegane," Brian admonished him. "You can barely stand." "Balls," the hound replied as he turned to a water barrel, dropping his sword. He seized it with his mighty hands and, in one fluid move, raised the barrel over his head and upturned the water all over himself. The cold liquid flooded down him, covering his face and body. Sander turned to scoop up his sword once more. His long uneven hair was plastered about his face, satisfied. He snarled. "Good enough, I suppose. Just try and keep up," she told him before nodding to Willers Tyrell and Sansa. That done, she sprinted off into the darkness, Garland hot on her heels. "We should raise the alarm," Garland cried at her as they ran. "Not yet," Brian said, feeling foolish as they darted down the trail between the tents. "We don't even know if I'm right." "I know who my money's on," Garland gasped as they headed for the pavilion. It was the work of moments to navigate round the feasting tents and head for the palisade. As they approached the wooden wall, Brian felt a sickening dread when she saw that the gates were unguarded. She drew her sword. "They've slipped past the enclosure. The enemy is inside our walls." Brian increased her stride, her legs working furiously as she propelled herself through the unprotected gates. She heard Garland Tyrell and the hound breathing heavily as they followed her. Brian didn't halt as she sprinted towards the royal tent. The large canopy looked ominously vulnerable as she saw that the guards that should have been on duty here had also been removed. How in the hells? Movement caught her eye. Figures, clad in black, tried to slip into the shadows cast by the large tents. Brian pointed in the direction of the fleeing figures. "Clegane!" she roared, fighting for air as she pushed forward. She did not look back to see if the hound had obeyed her command before she moved on towards the king's tent. The clouds in the sky above them parted and moonlight hit the enclosure, illuminating the space with faint light and pushing the shadow back. Suddenly the glint of steel could be seen from the tent opening. "Down, my lady!" Garland cried as he barreled into her from behind. He seized her legs and, together, they tumbled to the ground. The ground struck Brian hard, but, over the explosion of air from her chest, she heard the unmistakable sounds of a crossbow's bolt flying overhead to embed themselves in the wooden palisade behind them. Deftly, Garland Tyrell rolled to his feet and started forward, keeping his swords across his chest and his body low to the ground to avoid presenting too much of a target. Brian staggered to her feet and surged after her savior. Garland suddenly spun and threw one of his short swords at the tent opening. There was an abrupt cry of pain and fear as the knight dived forward. There was the whispering of steel against leather, and then the intruder attacked Garland with two knives. Brian's ally dived under an attempt to open his throat and swung his sword to block another strike. Brian entered the tent, past the corpse of the man who had died on Garland's sword. She paid the dead no mind as she pressed on until she halfway through the outer section of the king's tent. The space was empty, devoid of life. The torches had been extinguished and darkness pervaded the tent. That alone would have concerned Brian, but tonight panic threatened to overwhelm her. Again, a slither of movement caught her eye as, out of the darkness, a figure loomed brandishing another crossbow. A bolt flashed in the darkness, smashing into her armor. The fine breastplate deflected the missile and caused it to rebound across her forearm. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Brian threw herself forward, lashing out with her sword. The black figure blocked her slash with the crossbow and then struck her across the face with the large wooden object. White light flashed in front of her eyes, her vision swam as she was knocked back. She used her sword to fend the man off as she tried to clear her head. Suddenly the man threw the crossbow at her. She ducked again before realizing it was just a distraction as her attacker pulled a short sword from a sheath at his side and stabbed at her. Brian only just managed to get her sword up to parry the strike. Her opponent was strong and agile, their eyes had already adjusted to the darkness. A second blow followed the second, knocking her off balance. Brian reeled before kicking out at what she hoped was the assailant's shin. Her strike missed completely and she stumbled forward. Another blow smashed her from her feet and her knees hit the ground. Desperately Brian abandoned her sword and seized her opponent around the waist. The man grunted with surprise and attempted to swing his sword, but Brian hugged his arms to his chest as she rose to her feet. Boldly she pitched the man off balance and they both hit the floor. She rolled over the panicked man, driving him into the floor as he scrambled to get away from her. Sparing a hand for a brief second, she pulled a knife from her belt and rammed it hard into the man's midriff. The blade went through the soft fabric of her opponent's tunic. A moan of pain and escaping air came from her opponent. Brian quickly withdrew the knife and plunged it again and again into her attacker. The man's body tensed for a few horrible moments and then went still. Breathing heavily, Brian clambered off the dead man to kneel at his side. She looked around once more. This time, her eyes had adjusted to the dimness. She suddenly noticed the prone figure of Grey Wind. The direwolf was lying on the floor, unmoving. With a cry of despair, Brian crawled quickly over the short distance to the direwolf's side. A quick feeling of the creature's neck gave her solace. He's alive. Unconscious, but alive. She got to her feet, still brandishing the bloody dagger she'd used to kill her enemy. The sounds of angry men and combat could be heard outside. With grim determination she pushed forward and entered the second section of the royal tent, where the king, queen and now young prince slept. It was quiet, terribly so. Brian could discern the outline of the queen sleeping on the white bed. Margaery Tyrell looked peaceful, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that only the body could hear. The sight almost made her almost cry with relief. She started towards the bed but then tripped over something. The ground came up to meet her with stunning force. Brian rolled and tentatively reached out to examine the obstacle that had made her lose her footing. A body. Fearing the worst, Brian reached over and pulled the corpse onto its back. She expected to be greeted with the dead-eyed stare of the king. She was surprised to see a face she did not recognize. Instead of the blue eyes of Robb Stark, she was met with lilac eyes set into a tanned face. The dead man had a mane of white gold hair. A curious collection of pearls and amethysts decorated his earlobe. A crossbow bolt had been shot deep within his heart. It was all she could do not to cry out in shock. Who in seven hells is this? I'd be obliged if you didn't cry out. You'll wake the baby. Brian's head shot up. There in the darkness, covered by shadow, was a small man, a dwarf. He sat on one of the queen's chests of clothes with a crossbow settled on his hips, the bolt pointing squarely at her face. In the dim light she could make out the blonde black hair and jutting forehead that seemed to be prominent features of the little man's face. Who the hell? The dwarf raised a finger to his lips as he hushed her, though the hand on the crossbow's trigger didn't move. I asked you to be quiet. The queen may have been drugged but the young one has not. Drugged? Brian turned quickly to look at the queen. If she were, then that explains why she has been asleep despite the sounds of me fighting a man just a short distance away. She's fine. Merely sleeping. The unfortunate fellow on the floor was going to pour another potion down the queen's throat. The man smiled. An evil, twisted thing. I had other plans. Brian didn't know how to react. On the one hand, it didn't appear as though the queen or her child were in immediate danger. If the little man had meant harm to them, he would already have carried that out. On the other, the king was missing. If you're looking for Robb Stark, I'm afraid he left a little while ago, the dwarf said, seemingly reading her mind. If I had to guess, he was going on a late-night inspection of the pickets. He shrugged. Shame the enemy had already got through you lines. Something about the way he said those words made Brian curious. You speak as if you are not one of them. Indeed, I'm not, the little half-man snorted. Besides, when I plan to kill a man I make a damn sight better job of it. Brian looked casually around her, looking for an advantage. She weighed up the option of throwing herself at the man, wondered if her armor would protect her from the bolt or, if not, whether she would still have enough time to bury her dagger into the man's chest. He's not wearing armor, I could take him before I fall. Again the man seemed to be able to sense her thoughts. The crossbow twitched in his hands. You could risk it, you may even make it, though one of us would surely die. Personally, I'm not keen on either choice. Why don't you simply help me guard the queen and prince against any of the other ruffians outside? That way we both get to live. He smiled grimly. Well, at least for a few minutes more. She stared at him. You want to protect them? Oh yes, the man chortled slightly. Have you not heard the expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? No. What of it? The dwarf sighed. I suppose it was too much to ask for the Starks to appoint a learned individual. He shook his head in disappointment. What I mean to say, good woman, is that I mean to protect your charges here. It would seem we have a common goal. Brian eyed him skeptically. The man gave an even deeper sigh. I'm not talking about trusting me. I dare say Forrester and his lady friend will be along shortly to vouch for my intentions. They were outside harassing the other assassins. Lord Forrester and his son are in the north, Brian accused him. The man's a liar. And Myra Forrester has never picked up a sword in her life. I defer to you, sweet lady, the dwarf smiled slyly. However, I was referring to Lord Forrester's second son, Asher. Brian blinked. Roderick had spoken of his brother a number of times, but, as far as she knew, he was in exile in Essos. I've never met him. Well, you should. He's a charmer. Not especially clean, but then the man looked down at his own clothing that was stained and soiled. Who am I to judge? He seems sincere and could have killed me already if that was his aim. Brian slowly backed up to watch the entrance to the tent. She glanced over at the man. If we are to wait, then you must tell me who you are. But of course the dwarf bowed his head humbly. My lady, you have the singular honor of addressing Tyrion, of House Lannister. Chapter 72, Tyrion 12. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. He sat alone in one of the feast tents near the pavilion. By the looks of the standard planted into the ground behind the high table, the tent belonged to one of the lords of the Vale, a place where the squires and captains of some noble lord could enjoy the festivities whilst their master was being entertained elsewhere. Likely at the center pavilion where the king had held court. The tent had not been empty when he'd arrived, roughly escorted by 4 soldiers who had walked him inside and roughly barked at the men who had fallen asleep under the tables until they roused themselves from their slumber and were compelled to leave the tent. The guards then told Tyrion to wait for someone more important to come speak to him before they withdrew to wait outside. Tyrion considered his situation as he took in the signs of the festivities that events had so rudely interrupted. The smell of roasted food and ale made for a delightful aroma that he savored, having recently lived on a diet consisting of thin soup and moldy bread. He looked about him. Half-eaten platters of meat, half-empty casks of ale and wine. Must have been a wonderful evening. He paused as he made sure he was alone. Fuck it. He sat down and reached across the table and picked up a half-filled goblet. He emptied the contents onto the floor and then promptly recharged the goblet from a jug on the table. He downed the cup in one swig. Ah, that hits the spot. A vintage from the Reach if I'm any judge. Tyrion refilled the goblet, happy that there still seemed to be plenty of the drink. He felt the effects almost instantly. He felt lightheaded, numb. A spreading feeling of contentment took hold. His nervous feelings being replaced by a feeling of excitement, at the prospect of explaining his actions. He felt heroic, having helped fight off the group that had meant to kill the king's wife and child. He shook his head at his momentary stupidity. The perils of drinking on an empty stomach, I suppose. He spied the table, pulling an empty plate towards him and filling it with some untouched food. Pointless letting it go to waste. The tent flaps stirred as 2 people were forced through the entry by yet another group of guards. Tyrion acknowledged the arrivals by raising his goblet. My friends. Glad you could join me. The first of the 2 glowered at him, her dark expression exacerbated by the fearsome scars across her face. I told you not to trust the little bastard. He's sold us out for wine and a fine meal. Not so fine as you suppose, good lady, Tyrion muttered in between mouthfuls of roasted mutton. I'm afraid the food is quite cold, and not especially well cooked. The second figure turned and laughed at Tyrion before giving the guards a charming smile. As the armored men left the tent, Asher Forrester swung a leg over the bench and beckoned to Tyrion for the jug of wine. The imp obligingly slid the container towards the Northman, who promptly poured himself a decent measure into his own goblet. Damn. That was a fine fight, he said with a wry smile as he drew heavily on the wine. He smacked his lips in satisfaction. At least 5 of the bastards, but we got them all. You got them? His companion asked sharply. Biska was standing behind her friend with her arms folded across her chest. Asher looked at her shamefacedly. Well, you helped a little. A little. The woman snarled, way I remember, you almost got your throat cut. He got lucky. Asher said with another grin, but I knew you were there of course. Of course, the woman grumbled sarcastically as she took a seat beside Asher. Good thing I'm always there to watch your back. And I thank you for it. Asher said smilingly. The warrior woman did not respond beyond the merest jut of the head, though she seemed mollified by Asher's words. For that, at least, Tyrion was grateful. The last thing he needed was for the woman to spend the short time they had before their interrogators arrived arguing with Asher. You were successful? Asher asked, his easy smile being replaced by a look of urgency. I was. Tyrion replied with a nod. I dealt with the leader as we discussed and waited the fight out in the tent. As a matter of fact, I was joined by a fierce woman fighter shortly after I arrived. She stayed with me. Fortunately, after the initial excitement I wasn't needed further. A warrior woman? Asher said wonderingly. Indeed. Tyrion gestured his head towards Biska, not so unlike our friend here. Maybe one of the Mormonts, Asher said, preoccupied by the identity of Tyrion's ally. Or perhaps Alis Karstark. The imp found himself unable to help the Northman. The woman who had stayed with Tyrion in the tent had not offered her name and he had been too scared to ask. He had been consumed with fear that, at any moment, more assassins would arrive and he'd be forced to fight for his life once again. I've been doing that too much recently. In the Vale, at King's Landing and now here. Abruptly the silence was broken by yet 2 more arrivals who were pushed roughly into the tent. The 2 looked disheveled, their clothes wet from hiding in the undergrowth of the fields surrounding the camp. The guards shot the taller of the 2 a dark look before leaving the group alone. Tyrion raised his goblet. Bronn, Pod. Nice of you to join us. The sellsword looked angrily at Tyrion, but before he could speak Pod beat him to it. My lord. Are you all right? Quite all right, thank you, Podrick. Tyrion waved them over. As is the king, queen and the little princeling. Come on now, we've got food and wine to spare. Hunger caused them to quickly join them at the table. Bronn angrily grabbing a pitcher of wine and pouring himself a cup while Pod tore into a roasted chicken. Tyrion looked the dirty, disheveled men over. My, you 2 do look the worse for wear. Bronn looked at him angrily. That's because we were in a cell for over a month under the Red Keep, the last few days traveling across country and then spent tonight in a fucking ditch. Ah yes. That must be it. Tyrion said jovially. Are you both well otherwise? Aside from the hunger and the smell. Podrick Payne nodded in the affirmative while Bronn glowered at him. What I want to know is how we were found. We sat there all night with the patrols riding right past us. Then the last patrol left the camp and headed straight for us. They knew where we were hiding. Of course they did, Tyrion said as he drank from his goblet. I told them where you were. The sellsword seethed. You did what? Tyrion adopted a look of innocence, naturally. Bronn looked ready to leap across the table at him. Now, I know you're likely to be upset. But be reasonable. Fuck reasonable. Bronn snarled. You sold us out. We're freezing our cocks outside and you're in here having a bloody cask of wine to yourself. This is a recent development, Tyrion assured him with a thin smile. This just happens to be where they are holding us while they secure the camp. I dare say we'll be moved forthwith. Even quicker if some of the guards had their way. It was only be the good graces of one of the Tyrells that our heads aren't decorating the palisade walls. Still, no need to depress the rest of them quite so soon after success. So why sell us out? Tyrion crossed his arms. Come now my friend, assassins just attempted to kill the king. The whole camp is in an uproar. It would have been sunrise in a few hours. Did you really want to be out skulking near the camp, in a ditch no less, when it gets light? What if you'd been caught? He settled back. No, far better that we are honest with the Starks. If we have nothing to hide then we have nothing to fear. He wanted to cringe from the earnestness of it all. Gods, I almost sound like Pod. Bronn went silent as he thought through the implications of what Tyrion was saying. The imp used the lull to take another goblet of wine. Might as well, it may be a good long time before I have any again, if ever. The thought was a depressing one. The Starks wouldn't kill me now, would they? He didn't know the answer to his question, and that troubled him. They sat in silence, helping themselves to more refreshment. Time slowed to crawl as they shared yet more leftover food and drink. Each person seemed devoted to their own thoughts, mulling over hopes and fears of what was to come. It was quite possible that tonight may yet go ill for them, a fact not lost on anyone around table. Though they had acted with the best intentions, there was no way to know if they could convince the Starks of that fact. Their musings were interrupted by the tent flaps being drawn back and an armored figure striding into the room, quickly followed by two swordsmen with a silver wolf brooch on their tunics. The man was handsome, well-built, with a fine beard and long curly hair. He rested a hand on the pommel of a short sword he had strapped to his waist. "I'd wager that weapon has seen death this evening." The knight scowled at the table. He seemed perturbed that they'd taken it upon themselves to partake in some of the feast's leftovers. "Who in seven hells are you people?" The group looked to Tyrion. "I never was much of a talker," Asher whispered. Tyrion sighed. "Well then, here goes." Our good Sir Tyrion swung his legs so he could more gracefully alight from his seat. "As I was explaining to your men before we were detained, Lady Brienne says you claim to be Tyrion Lannister?" the knight asked, looking him over from his scuffed boots to his dirty unkempt hair. "Is that true?" "It is," Tyrion replied, keeping his face honest and open. "I have traveled here from King's Landing with my friends here to warn Robb Stark of a likely attempt on the life of both him and his family." "A little late, wouldn't you say?" another voice spoke up from behind the knight. The first man stood aside as a small man entered. This man was slighter than the knight and used a cane to move, one of his legs being lame, twisted from some injury. Discounting body types, though the men's faces were so similar that Tyrion quickly realized they were related. "You should be with the king, brother," the knight hissed, though his anger was displayed at Tyrion and his friends. "The king is speaking to the Grand Maester, who has concerns about Margaery." The knight's face went white. "They said she was well." The crippled man adjusted his weight on his simple cane. Septon Hysterica only confirmed that she still lived, but then could not wake her. It was only after a proper examination by Lewyn that the cause was identified. "She has been drugged," the knight started, "though Lewyn assures us that she will wake shortly." "Such concern." Tyrion quickly examined the men. A quick look told him that though the cripple had no sigils or badges of office on display, the knight had a distinct emblem on his armor, that of two golden roses on a field of green. Evidently a Tyrell. "The Queen's two brothers." "That is excellent news." Tyrion spoke up. "For all of us. Believe me when I say we have nothing but the Queen's best interests at heart." "Silence!" the knight roared as he rounded on the dwarf. Now, Garlan." The cripple bade in a soothing tone, "We mustn't lose our temper." "Ah, Garlan Tyrell, well then the other man must be his brother, Willers." The younger of the two siblings turned to his older brother. "You talk to me about temper, when our sister has only just survived an assassination attempt." "But she did survive," Willers said pointedly, "and did so, in no small part, due to the efforts of our friends here. It would be prudent to find out their role in all this, if for no other reason than to determine how it was that they breached our security." "Brian is interrogating the prisoners," Garlan muttered, "at least the two who survived capture." "Fuck, I thought I got them all," Asher whispered. "Fool sounds positively disappointed." "We can help you with your questions," Tyrion said politely, eager to start on the right note. "Good to know." Willers moved to the table opposite their own, setting his cane aside and levering himself down into a chair. "I for one am eager to know how you people managed to get inside the camp." "Here goes. Only 3 of us did," Tyrion explained. "Myself, Asher and Bisker here smuggled ourselves through your lines as part of one of the supply convoys originating in the Reach." Uli Garlan snorted, who had moved to stand near his brother. "The convoys are searched before they are permitted entry." "I too am skeptical," Willers spoke from his chair. "Forgive me, my lord, but you are hardly an inconspicuous figure. A man of such stature would certainly have been noticed during the searches. Are you still a lord when your family has been destroyed and your lands occupied?" A question for the maesters perhaps. Agreed, but the fact I am such a vertically challenged individual is the reason I was able to slip by unnoticed. I think you'll find that one of the apple barrels brought from Highgarden didn't contain as many of the fruit as the loaders would have thought. He suppressed a shudder at the memory. It wasn't only the indignity at hiding in a barrel if father could have seen me, but the pain of having Bisker and Asher dropping multiple apples onto his head in their haste to get moving as the convoy made camp just south of the Blackwater was fresh in his mind. The two former sellswords had then joined the convoy at the precise moment that scouts from the Stark camp had rendezvoused with the convoy. As Tyrion had predicted, both patrols assumed that Asher and Bisker belonged to the other side. It was a risky maneuver, but Asher, being a northerner, was not questioned once his regional accent had been heard. Willers raised an eyebrow. The heir to Casterly Rock came to us, concealed in a fruit barrel. As my father was fond of saying, there's a tool for every task and a task for every tool. The thin man looked amused. Quite. Garland Tyrell bristled. Willers, Not now. Garland. One brother looked disapprovingly at the other. We must let them tell their story. Give us enough rope to hang ourselves with, you mean? Tyrion smiled gratefully at Willers. Using the opportunity afforded him by the cripple, he quickly outlined the last day and night's activities. He told the tale of how he, Asher and Bisker stole into the camp just before the feast was due to start. The camp was a hubbub of activity, and even the stringent security missed their entry. As the feast had worn on, the three had worked their way closer and closer to the royal enclosure. The imp left few details out as he detailed how they infiltrated the palisade to counter the threat they believed was coming. Forgive the interruption, Willers said, raising a hand like a child at lessons. I have a question. I am confused as to why you went to all this effort. If you suspected that the king and queen were in danger, why did you not simply just report the threat to the first guard you came to? The imp turned his misshapen eyes to stare at Willers. His gaze, so often the cause of discomfort in many others, seemed to have absolutely no effect on the heir to Highgarden, who merely looked at him with curiosity. Would you have trusted such a report? The man tilted his head in an odd way. Well, that would depend on the reason for your mission. You seem remarkably well informed on the intentions of our enemies, given that you claim you were assisting us. I can vouch for the imp's intention, my lord, Asher Forrester interjected. Both the mission and the intelligence behind it are honest. And just who are you, sir? Garland asked. The knight was gripping the hilt of his sword as if he might draw his weapon at any moment. I am Asher of House Forrester, the young man declared boldly. I am the son of Lord Gregor Forrester. That is highly convenient, Garland snapped. You doubt my word? Asher accused, hotly, jumping to his feet, his cheeks flushing red. Garland Tyrell was not impressed by the other man's anger. You cannot prove what you say. Both Lord Gregor and his son Roderick have journeyed north with Lord Stark, as have their men. There are few northerners in our camp at present. So the chances of us being able to confirm your identity are slim. Garland looked angrily at the group, then at Willers. I have trouble believing this tale. How dare you? Asher raged, looking about to rush the armored man. I'll not have my word questioned by a pansy-assed southerner. He certainly sounds like he's from the north, Willers said with a wry smile. Not sure if he was being mocked or not. The Forrester boy went even redder. He's quick to anger, this one. Calm down, Asher, Tyrion mumbled softly, reaching for the youth's arm. Getting angry doesn't help us. I quite agree with your short friend, Willers said to Asher, standing and putting a restraining hand on Garland's shoulder. But there is an easy way to solve this dilemma. There is. Garland looked across at him in surprise. Indeed. You've forgotten that Lord Gregor and Roderick were not the only Forresters with us in the camp. Willers looked over to one of the guards. Please ask the Lady Myra to attend us here. She'll most likely be found with the Queen. Myra. Asher breathed hopefully. Tyrion smiled. Despite the boy's hot-headedness, the imp found much to like about the boy. He was intelligent and had a good sense of humor. Tyrion had seen firsthand Asher's eagerness to see his family again. As they sailed upriver and traveled across country, the boy's anxiety and excitement had grown in equal measure. The imp had felt for him when they had discovered during a conversation with some soldiers that the Forresters had headed north to deal with the rebellion sparked by the Boltons. Overhearing the news from the shadows of a wagon, Tyrion had experienced a pang of envy and grief. At least Asher's family is alive, in danger, granted, but still among the living. Mine are dead and gone. My brother and sister, their children, even my father, all had journeyed on to the next world. As the guard left the tent, Tyrion felt a rare spark of hope. Well, if there is someone here who can confirm Asher's identity, then this will all go much more easily than I'd thought it would. They waited in silence for a few moments. Willers looking pleasantly while his brother glowered in anger. Tyrion tried not to take it personally. The man's sister was almost killed. While I can't see myself getting too upset about someone killing Cersei, I can certainly appreciate the notion of being bitter about someone trying to kill certain relatives. A niece and nephew, for example. Yes, I can certainly appreciate ill feeling on that score. A few minutes later the guard returned accompanying a young girl wrapped in a silken shawl. The maiden had long raven hair. She looked tired but alert as she was led in by the guard. "My lady," Willers said with a slight bow, "thank you for joining us. We have a question too." "Asher!" the girl exclaimed, her eyes wide as she took in the group. "Is it you?" "Well, I believe that answers our question," Willers observed, leaning against the armrest of the chair he had been sitting on. "Not necessarily," Garland retorted. He turned to the girl, his face softening. "Myra, can you confirm that you know this man?" "Of course I can," Myra Forrester said determinedly. "The man is my brother." "You're sure?" Garland asked urgently. "Roderick told me that your brother had been in Essos for some years. He would likely not be, as you remember." "Indeed he isn't," Myra said impatiently, looking intently at Asher. "He's older, and he's grown a fuller beard, but it's him. I'm certain of it." "He could be an imposter," Garland persisted, "someone who might simply look like Asher." "For what purpose?" Tyrion asked. "What reason would he have for such a deception?" "For this," Garland snarled angrily, "to provide a pretext for your presence should you be caught. Caught with the blood of several of the would-be assassins on our blades." Tyrion snorted. "Some pretext? You're well known for your able brain, my lord." Garland hurled accusingly. "I'm sure it's within your ability to arrange a reason to be in the camp when the attempt on the Queen's life occurred." "Well, he's right there." Tyrion ignored Garland, and addressed Willers. "Again, why bother? We have been upfront about why we were here. We are not arguing that we are escapees from the Targaryens. But it is true that we were here to save the Starks." He smiled. "An endeavor, though perhaps I flatter ourselves, we did ably and well." Willers nodded. "I agree." "Nonsense!" Garland stormed. "I think it far more likely that the imp was here along with a group of sellswords." He looked at Asher and Bisker. "You are sellswords, aren't you? With the Golden Company?" "The Second Sons actually," Asher noted sullenly. Tyrion winced. Whichever group they were in couldn't matter in the slightest. Garland barely registered the correction. "So they infiltrate the camp to kill the Queen. Then, when the attempt goes sour, the imp and his friends turn on the rest of their group and claim that they were there to prevent the others. The story of being a Forrester simply another falsehood to add credibility to their story." "That's a lie," Asher roared. "We were there to save the Queen, not hurt her. Fuck me. She would be dead if not for us." "As colorful as your language is," Sir Willers said with a concerned look, "I'm sure you'll forgive us for having trouble when it comes to believe that Tyrion Lannister would be acting to save the Queen." He turned back to Myra. "Pardon my rudeness, my lady, but are you sure this is your brother?" "There is no doubt in my mind," Myra replied firmly. Her eyes had not left her brother. She tilted her head. "However, if you require proof," she drew herself up as she addressed Asher. "The words of our house. Iron from ice." Asher replied instantly. "The name of our mother." Myra shot back. "And her original house?" "Elissa," Asher replied with vigor, "originally of House Bramfield." Myra crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "Finally, what object did you send me from Essos to remember you by?" Humor and love filled the face of the Forrester boy. He beamed at his sister. "I sent you a coin from Yunkai." Garland Tyrell looked angrily towards Tyrion's companion. "I hardly see what that pro." The night voice died as Myra Forrester's hand dipped into her robe and emerged with a small object in her outstretched palm, a small coin that glistened in the torch's flickering light. There was silence as everyone stared at the girl's hand. Tyrion finally forced his head upright. He fought to keep smug satisfaction from crossing his face. He doubted it would be appreciated here. He gave a wry look at Willers Tyrell. Satisfied? The eldest son of Mace Tyrell looked questioningly at Myra Forrester. At his unspoken inquiry she merely nodded once. Content, the man turned to address the small party. It would appear that young Asher here has proven his case. If Lady Myra is satisfied, then I am willing to give the group a proper hearing before the king. The younger sibling looked outraged. Willers I. Garland Willers Tyrell uttered the name with enough force to instill silence in his brother. The Forrester name is above reproach. The king and queen owe their lives to Lord Gregor, and Margaery will not have a word said against Lady Myra. I am willing to believe their story. There is nothing to contradict it. We'll see what Brian and the Hound get out of the survivors, Garland said, his handsome face flushed in anger. We should not put these people before the king before the interrogation of the others is complete. We are willing to wait. Tyrion spoke up quietly. We are at the king's pleasure. Willers leaned over his cane, his brow was furrowed. Unfortunately, we do not have the luxury of time. One way or another, it cannot be denied that an attempt has been made on the life of the queen. The king will want answers, and quickly. He glanced over Tyrion's small group. It could be that you will have those answers. Perhaps. Tyrion weighed his words carefully, though I am only prepared to speak to the king's council. Garland was incensed. You dare presume? Yes, I do, Tyrion replied simply. I have nothing to gain from lying, but if I were to tell what I know now, then you would have no further use for me or my companions. We have people who are adept at prizing secrets from unwilling mouths, Garland said, though it was obvious that the notion did not sit well with him. This one is all gallantry and honor. I thought time was of the essence, Tyrion noted with gently mockery in his tone. While I'm sure your men could get us to speak, I assure you it will take them a little while to do so. Willers was looking intently into his eyes. True. However, as distasteful as it is, my brother is quite correct. You will tell us what we want to know. Tyrion felt the walls of the tent close in around him. He spread his arms wide so as to demonstrate that he presented no threat. Fret not, my lord, torture will not be necessary here. We are quite prepared to tell you everything. The crippled man's face twisted with curiosity. Your price? My, it would seem that intelligence skipped straight from the Queen of Thorns, bypassed her son, and went straight on to her grandchildren. This man is far sharper than any child of Mace Tyrell has any right to be. We have no price. Tyrion declared evenly, though I would ask that all my companions go free. If someone must take any responsibility, then it is me. My house is in conflict with the Starks, the others here have nothing to do with the war. Save that they were in the royal enclosure, armed and ready for battle, Garland observed. Actually, the lad and I weren't, Bronn interjected casually. We were off minding our own business in a field when your boys came and brought us here. We did no fighting. And Asher and the woman saved the queen and her newborn. Tyrion stated firmly. They owe them their lives. Willers Tyrell paused for a moment. Despite the boy's anger, it was clear that Garland was willing to do his brother's bidding in this matter. He stood at attention and waited for his elder sibling to decide what to do. Finally, the older of the two nodded as he made a decision. Very well. We will take you before the king so that he may hear your tale. He raised a hand as Garland began to object. Just Lord Tyrion, the rest will remain here. Well, that's something. Clearly, Tyrion wasn't alone in this thought. If I may, my lord. Myra Forrester said, speaking clearly, her eyes locked on Willers Tyrell, I would humbly suggest that my brother be brought before the king as well. He may be of assistance. Absolutely not, Garland said firmly, the boy is clearly a trained warrior. Until his loyalty is beyond doubt, then it would be a mistake to allow him before the king. How can we confirm his loyalty until we have heard what he has to say? Willers asked politely, glancing once more at the group. I have no objection to Lady Myra's suggestion. They will be unarmed and in the presence of the Wolfguard. If they believe they could fight their way through that protection tonight, then they are foolhardy and stupid. Brian alone would kill them both without pausing for breath. Tyrion almost shuddered at the memory of the tall warrior woman who had joined him in the king's tent to fight off any further assassins. It was she who had turned him over to the guards when the all-clear had been given. The look of ferocity on the woman's face would have been enough to give anyone pause. He had no doubt that Brian of Tarth was more than capable of acting as Willers has indicated. He looked from one Tyrell sibling to the other and then glanced over his shoulder towards Asher. The Northern looked deflated but resolute. Tyrion turned back, giving his most disarming smile. "Well, we're ready when you are." The confidence Tyrion had so blithely displayed before the Tyrells began to ebb away like the tide as he and Asher were escorted towards the royal tent. They were surrounded by armed men, but that did not prevent other soldiers and knights from giving them cold and furious glances as they passed in front of them. Their hollowed-out eyes highlighted by the early dawn light that crested the eastern horizon. Tyrion kept his eyes locked on the royal enclosure in front of them. Without the guards he'd likely be torn to pieces by the mob, but he couldn't afford to think about that at the moment. He needed to concentrate on the task ahead. Garland Tyrell led the group, his long stride setting the pace. Tyrion struggled to keep up as his small legs tried to maintain the speed with which the taller man was moving. He looked with envy at Asher Forrester, who walked beside him, his head held high, his eyes blazing, as if daring the suspicious eyes that followed them to challenge their presence. His pride has been hurt. This is not the homecoming he was hoping for. Willers Tyrell was at the rear, limping away as he engaged in hushed conversation with Myra Forrester, who, for her own part, was shooting lingering looks at the back of her brother. Tyrion expected that the girl would have liked nothing better than to be catching up with her kin, but she seemed to sense that it was more important to conclude matters before proceeding with family business. Cersei had once asserted that all Northerners were uncouth savages, sharing more in common with the wildlings beyond the wall than with the Southron lords. That hasn't been my experience. True, they are quick to anger and take their own sweet time to puzzle issues through, but there is a wry intelligence to them. He spied the Forrester girls as she moved gracefully. And beauty as well, let us not forget that. Their small party entered through the gateway that marked the entranceway to the royal enclosure. Guards stood at even intervals looking alert and suspicious as the new arrivals walked towards the central tent. At the tent entrance, Garland nodded to the two guards and stepped through, leaving it to the guards behind Tyrion and Asher to urge their captives forward. The tent looked different now that it had light illuminating its confines. Torches and braziers were lit and their heat made the atmosphere hot and unsettling. Tyrion glanced about him. The space was full of waiting lords and knights who all regarded him with an angry light. He tried to think of something to say, but before the words could form the silence was broken. "Lord Willers, I must protest." Brian of Tarth had left the secondary section of the tent, the one that Tyrion knew housed the king and queen, and was standing surveying Tyrion and Asher. "These people are suspected of conspiring to murder the queen and the prince. Why are they here?" The woman's voice was full of outrage and outright condemnation. She loomed over the much smaller figure of Tyrion, who tried to quell his fear as he stared upwards at the giant of a woman. Angry mutters of agreement rumbled from the other attendees. Willers Tyrell did not look deterred. He shifted his weight onto the cane as he came to a stop. "I have determined that the king should hear what they have to say. There is much they can tell us." The heir to Highgarden glanced around the room, his eyes warding off the angry nobles. "I will take responsibility for bringing them here." Permission should have been sought. Brian insisted, though there was a small measure of uncertainty in her eyes. "You stand beside. We all know who the little man is." A voice came from behind Brian. "Tyrion Lannister." Catelyn Stark stepped out from where she had been standing in Brian's shadow. She was wearing a long robe that only partially covered her nightdress. Her hair was bound loosely by a cord that she herself had evidently applied before arriving at her son's side. For all her informal look, the Lady of Winterfell maintained the air of dignity and composure that Tyrion remembered from the Eyrie. The lady surveyed them with a cold eye. "What is the meaning of this, Sir Garland? You bring assassins into our midst. Practically into the king's company." Tyrion felt Asher stiffen in anger. He put a restraining hand on the man's arm. "I object to the title, my lady," he started to reply. "We. I know full well what you are, Sir." Lady Catelyn cut him off. "You are an enemy of my family. First you tried to kill my son, Bran, at Winterfell. Then your family attacks my father's lands, while your sister imprisons my husband for attempting to reveal the magnitude of her crimes, the betrayal and then subsequent murder of King Robert. Then, in an attempt to hold on to your ill-gotten throne, your family engages in a war that engulfed the entire realm. Thousands lie dead because of you and your house. The woman's voice became still colder, almost deadly. Finally, unable to win on the battlefield, you resort to base villainy. The same kind of black-hearted actions you engaged in previously. You corrupted the Freys and the Boltons, had them murder my brother and his guests at his wedding when they should have been under the protection of guest right. Finally, when even this failed and you lost your last chance to win on the battlefield, you attempt to stow into our camp at night, under the cover of darkness, to murder the Queen and her son in a petty act of vengeance. By now the mutterings of the surrounding highborn had become blatantly sinister. Tyrion though refused to look at them and instead kept his eyes forward facing towards his accuser. I and my friends had nothing to do with the attempt on the life of Queen Margaery and Prince Ricard this evening. Indeed, we acted to stop it. Lady Catelyn's eyes were full of dark humor, and tell me, why should we believe the word of a man who attempted to murder my son in his sickbed? That again. Tyrion shook his head. Lady Stark, I was not involved with the attempt to kill your son. I asked you months ago to believe that, during our long trip through the Vale. I didn't believe you then, Catelyn Stark spat, and I don't now. If you hadn't hoodwinked my sister into allowing you to trial by combat, I would have kept you in chains back then. Where I would no doubt have stayed until someone dispensed the king's justice by removing my head from my shoulders. Yes, I know. The imp pursed his lips and adopted a look of sincerity, but as it was, you had to release me. Now events have moved on apace. The woman looked at him unblinking, so it would appear. This is pointless. Other than to repeat myself, I have no further recourse. I did not order a man to kill your son at Winterfell. Nor did I plot to kill your family this evening. I do not believe you, Lady Catelyn said flatly. The men around Tyrion started to press in. If it were up to me. Then I'm grateful that it is not up to you. Silence gripped the tent. The Lady of Winterfell's eyes were mere pinpricks. What did you say? She asked the question calmly with a voice as hard as winter. Tyrion took a deep breath. I mean no disrespect, my lady, but the reason you were made to defer to your sister in the Eyrie was that she was the ruler there. You did not command there and you do not command here. Tyrion saw that his words had struck a chord. I will explain myself to the king. You presume, Catelyn began. I beg your pardon, my lady, Willers interrupted, but I believe we should allow the man's request. The woman before him glowered as her eyes bore into him, radiating fury. There was a moment's silence that lasted an age. Finally Lady Catelyn looked away. Very well, she conceded, once again you have escaped my clutches. She smiled ruefully before a cruel thought made her mouth curl, though I assure you, by the time my son is through with you, you'll wish you hadn't. Catelyn looked to the side. Inform my son that Tyrion Lannister wishes to speak with him. Brian cleared her throat. The large warrior woman looked uncomfortable. My lady, the king is discussing the Queen with Grand Maester Lewyn. Perhaps it would be best that. The Queen is fine. Catelyn cut in impatiently. She was not hurt in the attack and is merely resting. She clicked her tongue in annoyance when Brian showed no sign of obeying her instruction. Still, I take your point. I will go and speak with him. Well, that can only go badly for us. Tyrion mused as Catelyn stepped through the tent partition and went out of sight. The woman has disliked me since she kidnapped me in the Riverlands. You'd think saving her precious good daughter and grandchild would count for something. He glanced upwards at Asher. The northerner seemed unconcerned, confident that an audience of with the son of the beloved Eddard Stark could only help their case. I wish I was so sure. The crowd in the tent had resumed its mutterings, the low sound rising as more and more people became involved with the conversations going on all around him. My lords, the king. The crowd quickly bowed in obeisance as Robb Stark entered through the canvas door. Even Asher bowed his head as the king in the north strode boldly towards them. Only Tyrion kept his head raised, determined as he was not to cower before the family that were once his enemies. Tyrion observed the man before him with keen interest. He is much changed since I saw him last. When I beheld the youth in the great hall of Winterfell, he was nothing but a boy, overshadowed by the mantle of his father's position and title while Lord Eddard had been in the south as Robert's hand. The boy had looked overwhelmed then. Not now. Even with his wife and child attacked, Robb Stark looked in control, purposeful as he stood in front of them. Your Grace, Tyrion said genially, thank you for agreeing to see us. Robb Stark stared at him, as if hardly believing that the infamous son of Tywin Lannister was present before him. The imp I've met before. Abruptly he turned to the side to address Asher. Who in seven hells are you? The northern warrior squared his shoulders as he said defiantly, I am Asher, of House Forrester. The king's eyes widened slightly. Forrester. He repeated, examining the other man's face. I thought there was something familiar about you. His head jutted towards Tyrion. How is it that you find yourself in such company? Charming. I traveled with the Second Sons across the narrow sea. Asher's tone had become formal. I was sent with Lord Tyrion from the city to the camp. Sent? The king asked. By whom? Asher's eyes darted about him. He licked his lips nervously. I think, your grace, that is a conversation best had in private. Private? Brian of Tarth exploded from behind the king. You dare ask for a private audience with the king when you were part of an effort to kill his grace's wife and child? Asher's face reddened once more. We were here to save the Starks, not hurt them. So you say, Brian shot back, but how can we possibly trust you? How do we even know you are who you say you are? Your grace, if I may. Willers Tyrell's voice cut over the angry cries from the surrounding highborn. The gentlemen maintain that they were not part of the group of assassins that attacked us this evening. This coincides with reports we've had from others about the raid, including that of the Wolfguard commander herself. Brian came up short, any sound of protest dying in her throat. She seemed to be considering the other man's words. Ah, so she told the truth about how she found me with the Queen. That, at least, is reassuring. Willers seemed encouraged by Brian's lack of reply. Furthermore, Lady Myra has already confirmed Asher Forrester's identity. No one here would doubt her word. Any noise that had swirled around them abruptly died. Not a sound was heard beyond the tent flaps rustling in the breeze and the general activity of the camp outside. Varys chose my allies well. The Forresters appear to have done well out of this war. Willers moved his cane around from his side and brought it down with a definitive thump in front of him. The dual weight of both arms on the headpiece was enough to make the sound heard by those around them. At the very least we should hear what they have to say. Any objection from the surrounding highborn seemed muted by the heir to Highgarden's obvious support of the two intruders. Reluctantly, the king nodded. As you say, Willers. He turned a cold eye on Tyrion. What could be the harm? Robb Stark raised his head. My lords, please give us the room. As the nobles quickly moved to obey their sovereign, the man himself turned to address Myra Forrester. Myra, be so kind as to find Lady Olenna and bring her to us here. She is through there, with her granddaughter Catelyn, offered in a cold voice as she indicated the secondary section of the tent. Myra nodded in understanding, curtsied to the king, and then ducked through the partition opening. As the nobles went out of the exit, Tyrion took the opportunity to lean subtly towards Willers Tyrell. Whatever happens, my lord, I want to thank you. Willers seemed surprised. What for? For the fact that you treated us with respect and civility. I fear that many other highborn in your position would not be as generous. I thank you for your courtesy, Willers muttered, his mouth practically closed, though I admit I did not do it for you. Oh? Tyrion asked, making sure he kept own voice low. Who then did you do it for? The king and Queen, Willers replied. Margaery is my sister. I believe you have information about who tried to end her life. I would have you tell us that information. Tyrion did not believe that was the whole reason. You could easily have had your interrogators get that out of us. I could, Willers reasoned, but I confess I am intrigued by your presence here. An audience with the king seems the most efficient way of knowing your reasons. Fair enough. I thank you anyway. Tyrion said as they watched the last of the crowd left the tent. Bereft of the audience, the large space seemed suddenly empty and yet infinitely more intense. Tyrion turned his head. Robb Stark and his mother remained, as did the Tyrell brothers and Lady Brienne, who had moved closer to the king, a gauntlet hand coming to grasp her dagger hilt. So, we come to it at last. You have no need of that, my lady, Tyrion said, gesturing to the knife, sheathed securely in the warrior's belt. If we had meant harm to the king or his family, we would surely have acted differently tonight. So House Lannister has become a place of heroes, has it? A voice came from behind the king. Knowing what I do about your sire, my lad, the voice snorted contemptuously. I highly doubt it. He turned his head to look over the king's shoulder. So this is the legendary Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns. I dare say she'll live up to her reputation. He nodded in greeting before turning to speak to the king. My father is dead. Strange. I thought I would feel a little bit of sorrow at the loss of the only parent I've ever known. Serves you right, father, for being so insufferable all these years. As are my brother, sister and all 3 of their children. As is Shay. Though no one here would care to hear about her. I lead House Lannister now. You concede then, Catelyn said sharply, that your brother was the father of Joffrey and his siblings. I do. Tyrion said softly. Why bother to deny it? They are all dead. The truth can't hurt them now. The people in front of him seemed shocked at his frank admission. There was momentary silence as Lady Olenna came past the king, her wizened form belying the cunning eye she gave him as she shuffled towards them. Such an admission would have cost you dear had your father been alive. The old woman observed with a dry cackle, the confirmation of the rumor of incest between Tyrion's brother and sister, proving enough to spark Olenna's interest. Well, he's not alive, so I'll have to go unpunished, well for that at least. He watched cautiously as the Queen of Thorns came to stand between her grandsons and the king. Lord Tywin has paid for his crimes, Willers remarked formally. But has this man paid for his? Catelyn answered shrilly, he was part of the party that tried to kill the Queen and the Prince. There's no evidence of that, Willers said. Indeed, it appears that Lord Tyrion's presence actually prevented a calamity from taking place. You're welcome. The imp is clever, Catelyn replied dismissively. It is not impossible that this too is all part of some scheme. He is so consumed with bringing vengeance down upon us that he prevents others from killing us. Willers said with a raised eyebrow, a very elaborate scheme, my lady. Catelyn bristled at the tone of the nobleman. Yet a scheme it is, my lord, I promise you. She turned a wary eye on the imp. It would not be the first time he's used his wit to evade us. He escaped imprisonment in the Eyrie by outmaneuvering my sister. Oh yes, that clearly still stings. Indeed, my lady, Tyrion spoke up, though I dare say that a 3-legged sow could outmaneuver Lady Lysa. Do not dare speak my sister's name, Catelyn Stark seethed. Something has happened there. My apologies, Tyrion said awkwardly, but I would like to point out that your sister was determined to have me thrown to my death through that wretched moon door of hers. I only defended my life against someone who would unjustly take it. Unjust? Catelyn echoed, you still deny that you attempted to kill my son? That again? Tyrion shook his head. Lady Stark, I had nothing to do with the attempt on your son's life when he fell from the tower at Winterfell. Though I have a fair idea who committed that little deed. Much less did I send an assassin to kill him in his bed. From what my lady has told me, we only have Petyr Baelish's word that the Catspaw's dagger belonged to Lord Tyrion, Willers pointed out. I believe we all know how little such a thing is worth. Quite so. Pity I never got to thank that treacherous ingrate for that little bit of mischief. Still, maybe one day I'll have the opportunity. Catelyn Stark looked unconvinced. We may never know what happened to Bran, though I for one believe this man is responsible. However, what cannot be denied is that he was with the Queen this evening. That he came armed and proved willing to use my weapon in defense of Queen Margaery. Tyrion exclaimed, letting his voice fill with passion. My friends and I, he indicated Asher, infiltrated the camp, at great risk to ourselves, because we were alerted that an attempt on your lives might be underway. Generous of you, Olenna stated sarcastically, lifting her head from the hushed conversation she had been having with Willers Tyrell, but why go to so much trouble? I am of the North. Asher Forrester declared proudly. My house has sworn allegiance to the Starks. I'm sure. Olenna whispered, not at all moved with the youth's declaration. But the dwarf has no such ties to our camp. We'd been told you'd been imprisoned in the bowels of the Red Keep. Having gained your freedom, why come here? If anything, I would have thought you'd be more inclined to watch us die. Slowly, if possible. A few weeks ago that well may have been true. Put simply, Olenna went on, why help us? Why not? Tyrion countered hotly, true, House Stark and Lannister have been rivals in recent times. But that war is over. He swallowed deeply. We lost. Gallant of you, the old woman was relentless, but that does not answer my question. Losing a battle is one thing. A blade in the dark is something else. King Rob and Queen Margaery would doubtless use the events at the Twins as evidence to the contrary. Olenna said with a smile that lacked any warmth or compassion. My spies tell me that your Lord Father was responsible for that little outrage. Still fucking me soundly from beyond the grave, Father. Thank you very much. He was Tyrion aloud slowly. No sense saying otherwise. But, as your grandson points out, my Lord Father paid for his crimes. Granted, the woman grumbled, though for attempting to murder my granddaughter I would have preferred his death to be more protracted. I can imagine, Tyrion replied, but the fact remains that I had nothing to do with it. It was my father's work, along with Walder Free and Roose Bolton. It seems that the little man is in a confessing mood, Olenna remarked dryly to her grandsons. Perhaps we should fetch a maester so that all House Lannister's sins can be properly recorded. Fuck you too, you withered old crone. Tyrion straightened and made sure to look the matriarch of House Tyrell straight in the eye. I hope that any such account will begin with the fact that I saved the Stark Queen's life tonight as well as that of the newborn prince. An assassin entered the tent, intending to kill her. I stopped him, with a bolt through the heart. Hardly the work of an ally to the would-be murderers. Stillness gripped the tent. The audience, while not cowed by Tyrion's statement, were at least curious enough to be silent. Yet again you deny that you were part of the group. Garland spoke rapidly, yet your reasons for being here do not add up. I'll ask you once more. Why assist us? Tyrion took another breath. The next few minutes were crucial. A mutual friend believed that the king's life was in danger. He convinced me that it was in all our interests to travel with young Asher here to assist if possible. He nodded his head to the warrior standing next to him. Asher was red-faced still, the anger that he could be called an assassin still enraging him. The man did not speak but managed to indicate that Tyrion had spoken true. Again, you mention a mysterious benefactor. Willers said, taking up the interrogation. Once more, I ask for their identity. Tyrion paused. I was sent here by Lord Varys. The Spider. Olenna Tyrell's skepticism was clear. Her brow was furrowed in thought as she watched him intently. Tyrion could almost hear her mind racing to work through what he was saying. Now that he was committed, Tyrion saw no benefit in holding back. Yes. It was Lord Varys who freed me from the cells and helped me, Asher and the members of our little group, escape. Asher was planning to head north to this camp anyway, but Varys asked me to journey with him. Why would Varys want to alert us? Willers was looking thoughtfully at him. We are rivals. Not in this, Tyrion replied. He believes there is another force at work behind the scenes. One that is operating against all of us. How so? Tyrion directed his comments at the speakers, ignoring Robb Stark, who was watching the scene unfold before him with a detached expression. Instead, he made sure to look directly at Willers. Varys asserts that the deaths of Tommen and Joffrey were in fact not accidents nor a suicide at all. Tyrion breathed heavily. They were murdered. Willers blinked, though he did not seem surprised. Varys told you this. He did, Tyrion said defiantly, looking at Asher, who nodded in agreement. He also believes that the same faction is responsible for the destruction of the September, the murder of my sister, my niece and the High Septon. Not to mention most of the faith. Tyrion's face betrayed a slight anxiety. Though he has no proof of it. Ah, well, that is unfortunate, Willers remarked as he looked at his grandmother. Proof would have been beneficial. Tyrion scoffed. What did you expect? A signed confession of the deed. If what you say is true, the actions of this other faction seem to be aimed at the enemies of the Targaryens. Willers was leaning lightly on his cane as his eyes bore into Tyrion's own. And indeed, if their efforts had been fruitful, then the king, queen and prince might well have been killed, thus destabilizing the entire Stark alliance. Another point in favor of Daenerys and Aegon. Are you telling us that Varys has turned his allegiance away from them? Not at all. Tyrion folded his arms across his chest. But Varys maintains that Daenerys and Aegon had no part in the deaths of my family or the attack tonight. As I say, he believes it is a third group that means to start a war. A course that would have been all but certain had the attack tonight been successful. Tyrion's faces grew tight. Say what you want about the eunuch, but he believes in the Targaryens and the idea of peace. It sounds as if you dislike the man. Garland observed with a grim smile. I do, Tyrion responded honestly. He betrayed my family to the Targaryens. He filled my father and nephew's heads with ideas of alliances and dreams of conquest, all so that he could bring Daenerys Targaryen back to Westeros to assume the throne. He paused lest his voice break. It is because of his actions that my brother is dead. The Kingslayer. Garland noted with a harsh tone. The Kingslayer, Tyrion repeated, yet my brother all the same. You have a curious way of showing family loyalty, Catelyn Stark spoke up, what with you sharing the tent of your house's enemies. On the contrary, my lady, Tyrion gave a savage smile, it is because of my family that I am here. That I did what I did tonight. The Lady of W. Winterfell looked confused. What do you mean? What can we offer you? Vengeance, Tyrion replied firmly, looking at the woman with his misshapen eyes. My family is dead because of the actions of others. Ordinarily, I would leave you, Varys and the damned Targaryens, to your own devices. Let you tear yourselves apart fighting for a throne and have a good laugh at your deaths. It makes no odds to me. Willers gave a wan smile, and yet here you are. After our forces killed your brother and were partially responsible for your father's death, you still came to our assistance. Why? They killed Tommen and Myrcella. Tyrion had become very still. Make no mistake, good people, I did not do what I did tonight to help you. I did it to help me. Whoever killed my niece and nephew murdered sweet innocent children for no better reason than they were in their way. My brother died in battle and my father was struck down by enemy soldiers in the immediate aftermath of the fighting. While painful, I can accept that. This is war. What I will not accept is the murder of innocents. Varys warned me that the same faction that killed my family would most likely strike here. By helping you, I strike back at them. He paused for effect as he turned his gaze to the king. I desire vengeance, and I mean to use you to get it. There was a long moment of absolute silence. Tyrion worried he had gone too far, but he knew the Starks were an honest people and hoped that the simple truth would avail him now. If not, then I'm dead. Ah, well. I'll miss the wine and the women, but there's precious little else keeping me here. Finally Robb Stark nodded in understanding. That he said slowly, I believe. Catelyn Stark's mouth fell open. Robb. Mother, the young monarch barely looked at her. His story fits with Brian's report. Even the Hound's drunken account of finding Asher and his companion fighting the assassins tallies with what they've said. It could all be a carefully woven deception. Catelyn suggested. Perhaps. Robb looked at Asher. Do you back up the man beside you? Asher's back was spear straight. I do. That means very little, Catelyn said dismissively. We do not know this man. The king disagreed. I have fought and bled with his brother Roderick for over a year. He stared at Asher, and I owe his father my life. The son is not the father, Robb, Catelyn chided angrily. Maybe not, Robb said, but I have shared ale with Roderick many times. He spoke well of his brother. He often regretted Lord Forrester's decision to send him into exile. He had no choice, Asher said stiltedly, not if war was to be avoided. And it was something I agreed to. So I'm told, Robb stated. In any event, your family name earns you the benefit of the doubt at the very least. Besides, I judge a man by his actions and not his words. All agree, Asher, his friend and even the imp here saved the life of both my wife and my son. He turned to look at Tyrion while addressing Lady Catelyn. I owe them. Robb, you can't. Quiet, mother, the young wolf ordered with a wave of his hand. It is your impetuousness that caused you to capture Lord Tyrion in the first place and take him hostage. As I recall, that was the first real step that started the war that has engulfed the realm. Catelyn had gone as white as a bedsheet. He tried to kill your brother Robb. Did he? Robb looked quizzically at her. As has been pointed out, the only information we have confirming that comes from Littlefinger. It was he who had Aunt Lysa write to you blaming the Lannisters for Jon Arryn's murder, an act she later admitted to having committed herself. It was also Baelish who told you about the supposed ownership of the assassin's daggers when he stowed into Winterfell to kill Bran. Clearly the story is based on muddy ground and cannot be trusted. Well said. Still, are you really willing to believe that this man is on our side? If my manhood is in doubt, I could always pull my clothes down and show you. At this stage I am prepared to keep an open mind. The king turned all his attention to Tyrion and Asher. To convince me of your intentions, I have a further question I require you to answer. Robb beckoned Garland Tyrell forward. Grand Maester Stillowin is outside. have him join us. Yes, your grace. Garland bowed before walking to the tent entrance. A few moments later a stooped maester entered the tent. Tyrion had seen the man before at Winterfell. His piebald head and kind eyes were easily distinguished from the hard warrior expressions that Tyrion had seen since arriving at the camp. So this is the new Grand Maester Stark. Better pray he is more loyal and competent than Pycelle. The man was not alone, with him were 4 men who, between them, held a makeshift stretcher bearing a body. At Lewin's command they lowered the corpse to the floor and backed away to the corners of side of the tent. This is the assassin you say you killed, the king explained. I want you to identify him. Tyrion was allowed near the body, Asher behind him. It was the first time he'd really stopped to examine the man he had killed just a short while ago. It had been dark in the tent when the man had stolen through the entrance and Tyrion had let fly with the crossbow at the first opportunity. The man had barely cried out as the bolt had struck home and buried itself deep. Now though, in the bright light of the king's tent, Tyrion could see the black eyement of the assassin. The man had worn no armor, instead favoring dark silk, the better to maneuver through the camp unseen under the cover of darkness. He saw that the crossbow bolt had struck him through the back and pierced his heart, the silver point of which could be seen protruding from the man's chest. Using his boot, Tyrion pushed the face of the corpse in his direction. He hissed in surprise. What? Olenna asked urgently, speak. Tyrion glanced quickly at Asher before turning his eyes to the king. This is Lysan Omer, the spymaster of the Golden Company. Asher nodded firmly in confirmation. One of the Targaryen's sellswords. Willers noted, his words forming a statement rather than a question. Yes, Tyrion said reluctantly, his mind working furiously to piece it together. The Golden Company were pledged to Aegon, and while they had proved capable of any kind of treachery, just ask my lord father, the idea that they would defy Aegon and attempt to murder the queen was troublesome. So the Targaryens attempted to murder Margaery? Garland asked, seeking clarification. Of course, Olenna scoffed, who else would do so? A dagger in the night solves all problems. With respect, my Lady Lewin had folded his arms into his robes. I do not believe that this man intended to kill the queen with a dagger. The old man withdrew a vial from the confines of his grey robe. I believe he meant to poison the queen with this. Poison or dagger, what's the difference? Garland hurled back, his face twisted with disgust. Margaery would still be dead. Yes, but the manner of the death would be more easily misconstrued than if it had been caused by a weapon, Lewin said. Consider what we know. The Wolf Guard were distracted, pulled away from their duties with offered wine, their absence compounded by a miscommunication about who was to be on duty. Tyrion's mind flashed back to the night before, where he and Asher had realized that a simple miscommunication had left the royal enclosure open to attack. While most of the men were distracted by festivities, 4 men, clad in the clothing of the Wolf Guard, had relieved the sentries around the entrance to the enclosure and sent them to join the feasting. The men, eager to leave, and not yet knowing all their comrades within the new elite unit had left without thinking, creating a small hole in the defenses of the camp. Enough for the black-garbed assassin with a few assistants to enter the royal tent. If Asher, Bisker and I hadn't been watching. If I hadn't used my small size to go under the tent canvas and approach from the other side to surprise poor unsuspecting Lysan, who had left his accomplices in the tent's antesection, the night could have gone very differently. Caitlin had moved to stand beside the king. She was looking at concern upon the king. Explain your reasoning, Grand Maester. The man bowed his head. Upon a cursory examination of the substance, I believe it to contain a strong dose of a substance known to end a pregnancy in the womb. It is a dangerous concoction and I would not recommend it. Indeed, I would provide moon tea if a lady was trying to avoid becoming with child. Our enemies are a little late for that, Garland observed hatefully. The prince has already been born. The Maester looked grim. I fear that they had other plans for Prince Ricard. As for the queen, it is my belief that our foes intended to make her ingest this fluid. While it can end a pregnancy, an inevitable side effect is profuse bleeding from the womb. In a large enough dose it would almost certainly have caused the queen to bleed out. But you said she was already drugged, Willers observed. Sweet sleep, as I recall. Surely another few doses of that would have achieved what they wanted. Indeed, 2 doses of sweet sleep will help you sleep for a night. 3 will produce a sleep from which there would be no awaking. Maybe Pycelle was good for something. I can only speculate, Lewin murmured. but I suspect that the assassins wanted to pass the death of the queen off as a natural one. This would not have been the case with Sweet Sleep. Why drug her the first time then? Willers enquired, his face calm. Lewin regarded the vial in his hand. The first potion I spoke of is a vile concoction that requires enormous strength of will to keep down. The body rebels and attempts to void the liquid through copious vomiting. There is no way the queen could be compelled to take it were she conscious. The man bowed to the king. I regret your grace that it is likely that, had their evil plan worked, I would likely have taken the death to be caused by the complications found in childbirth. The queen's body is frail and weak. While unexpected, such bleeding would not have caused undue suspicion. The horror of it struck the group as they listened. The king was stone-faced, not a flicker of emotion showed as he stood, rooted to the spot. And the prince? Olenna whispered, her voice hard with outrage and hatred. I believe that they intended to give him the sweet sleep. Children are vulnerable to colds and illnesses. It would not have been impossible that he simply died in the night. How then did they intend to kill Robb? Caitlin asked in a terrified voice. Neither of these plans could be applied to him. I do not know, my lady. Lewin looked apologetic. I am at a loss. I may be able to help your grace. Tyrion spoke up. My friends and I were observing the royal enclosure for most of the afternoon. We watched the assassin, Lysander, arrive during the day and join his team, which had already infiltrated the camp and procured the armor and appearance of your guards. They made sure to provide the wine to your sentries as well as drugged wine for the queen and even a specially prepared hunk of meat for your pet wolf. We know this. Caitlin snapped irritably. Indeed, Tyrion said, not bothering to look at the woman. But what you don't know is that the assassins were moving into place when the king returned from the feast. They waited until he rode out before making their final move. We didn't know why at the time, Asher explained. It made no sense to us. It does if you assume that the king was not a target. Tyrion declared, if the intended victims were the queen and the prince, if the deaths were made to look accidental rather than murder, then it makes perfect sense. I agree, Willers said with an analytical look on his face. He scrutinized Tyrion, Asher and then the king. You'd have returned from your late night ride to an unresponsive child and a dying wife. Harsh, but true. Tyrion watched as the king's mind seemed to register how close he had come to tragedy. The heir to Highgarden cast an eye around the room. The question remains, why take this action at all? Does it matter? Caitlin spat, her face pale. It's Edmure's wedding all over again. What our enemies cannot achieve by strength at arms they attempt to gain through murder. She looked imploringly at her son. You must act to protect your family, Robb. Next time we may not be so lucky. Lucky? Does she now regard me as a good luck token? How gratifying. Your grace, this makes little sense, Willers implored. The Targaryens have peace with us. We are only a small step away from signing an agreement. Why turn on us now? He turned towards Tyrion. Do you believe that Targaryens are behind this plot? I cannot conceive of why they would be, Tyrion said slowly, playing for time. There seems to be little to gain. He shrugged, but it is possible. Possible, but unlikely. Willers noted passionately. You forget, my lord, Caitlin observed. If the imp is to be believed, then they've already killed all other claimants to the throne. Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, even Cersei. Why stop there? The next step is us. But why leave the king alive? Willers interjected, his cheeks flushing. Why kill the queen and heir but leave the king still standing? If the object is to conquer us, it makes no sense. You do the dragons a favor by assuming they have to make sense, Caitlin replied. We are not dealing with rational people. The Targaryens are mad. Have always been mad. Just look at Queen Daenerys' father. They believe they have a right to the throne and will do anything to get it. She turned on her son. Gods, Robb, they threatened to burn you when you wouldn't bend the knee. Only the size of your army stopped them. Varys did mention a third party, Tyrion offered, feeling he should say something. Nonsense. Caitlin spat. Who else is there? My husband has destroyed the Boltons and their allies. The North is now ours once again. We have long thought that there is an unseen player, working behind the scenes, Olenna noted softly, the person who freed Lord Eddard and alerted me to the plot to at the wedding. Tyrion listened intently. He was fascinated. No one knows who freed Ned Stark from the Black Cells. Someone alerted the Tyrells and Starks to Father's alliance with Roose Bolton, Walder Free and Balon Greyjoy. Amazing that such a player has worked from the shadows with only the barest hint of their involvement. I'd love to meet such a person. Surely this party would be working at cross purposes here, Willers observed. They've saved the Queen's life once only to plot to kill her again later. Highly inefficient. It's ridiculous, Catelyn cried dismissively. There is no third party. Varys is wrong. It is possible that he acted truly in this instance, Olenna remarked, seemingly weighing her words carefully. With the peace treaty being jeopardized, he must have thought it worth freeing the imp here to help us. To make us listen when he mentions another group or person who dances to their own tune. I'd like to think Varys had more in mind for me than that. If he freed me to be his errand boy, I'll be most disappointed. The man sees plots and traitors everywhere. Catelyn let out a dry laugh. The spider is caught in a web of his own making. He helped return the Targaryens to Westeros and never realized that he would never be able to control them once they were restored. His dream of peace is just that, a dream. It is possible that, with House Targaryen so fractured, that the left hand does not know what the right is doing, Lewyn mused. However, we have no way of proving anything. So we wait for them to try again. Catelyn retorted hotly. Willers turned to the king. Your Grace, I. No. The single word cast silence over the group. Robb Stark was standing with his fists clenched angrily at his sides. The cold eyes blazed with impassioned fury. No. We will not wait here for our enemies to strike again. Willers was not willing to give in quite so easily, but Your Grace, we must avoid being rash. It might not be the Targaryens. The king looked contemptuously at the corpse on the floor. Maybe. But I find it much more plausible that one or both of the Targaryens' rulers ordered this man to carry out this attack. The Golden Company is from Essos. As far as we know, we have no enemies there. Our only rivals are in the capital. Perhaps we should send the bodies of the assassins to the city. Willers ventured, demand an explanation. And listen to more half-truths or bare-faced lies. Robb asked with a sad shake of his head. No. I'll have no more of that, my lord. His mouth twitched. They tried to kill my wife and son. The king looked down briefly at the floor as if summoning his strength. Abruptly his head came up. The discussion of an alliance is over. As of this moment it is dead. As dead as the Targaryens would have had my family. He raised a hand to gainsay Willers. I know you would remind me that it may well be some factions from within their camp, but we cannot be certain. And indeed it does not matter. Does it not? Willers asked stoically. The truth of exactly who is responsible for tonight, Robb Stark looked at Tyrion, and the deaths of Cersei's children would be informative. But even if they confess, it is unlikely that it would resolve anything. He paused. Consider, would Daenerys surrender Aegon if it is proven that he is to blame? Half her army is pledged to him, just as her own is to her. If either side was willing to surrender, it would mean civil war within their own house. A modern-day dance of dragons. It would be a short war if we assisted one side, Garland said carefully. Or you could do nothing and let them fight it out if it came to that, Tyrion suggested. Robb shot him a hard look. And who would I be left with? A large armed force in the middle of Westeros, most likely with delusions of capturing the throne. Besides, a civil war will cost many lives. I will not do nothing while people suffer. King's Landing is already in flames. Hundreds are dead or homeless, made so by a fire that the Targaryens may well have started. I have pledged assistance and been denied. They are willing to let others die for their pride. They have potentially murdered children in their quest for power. The king's eyes had become something akin to shards of ice. There are madmen running the capital and I will suffer them no longer. The king had become very still, almost calm. I have tried my hand at diplomacy and almost lost my wife and son as a result. If the Targaryens want fire and blood, I will serve them both. He took a deep breath. Grand Maester Lewyn. The servant stepped forward. Your Grace. I want letters sent to our allies. The ones who have already moved into position. Yes, Your Grace. What should the letter say? It can be a standard dispatch, Robb Stark said easily, asking for a readiness report. However, the signature will be different. How so, Your Grace? The old man looked grim but firm. "It is to be signed Cregan Stark." The king replied. "They will all know what it means." "Yes, your grace," Lewin said, bowing deeply. "It will be as you command." The four men met in the king's tent as the sun rose high into the sky. One man wore a crown. One was encased in bronze armor etched with ancient runes. The next used a cane to keep himself at attention while his pitch-black armor, engraved with a blackfish sigil, hung from his thin frame. The final man wore newer, more highly polished armor, his bald head, closed-cropped beard and massive Valyrian greatsword paying testament to his prowess at war. The group scrutinized the map before them, finalizing plans, adjusting last-minute details. They spoke briefly in short, warrior terms that abandoned florid detail or unnecessary embellishment. These were serious men, with a serious purpose. The Targaryens had seized the throne by force of arms, stealing it from others. They had taken the city and claimed it for their own. Together, as they made their plans, Robb Stark and his generals resolved to take it back. Notes. Happy New Year. Apologies for the delay in updating. I've been away for a while and doing things like moving house. I'm back now and I hope to make some proper headway with this. There is a big chapter coming soon that will hopefully make up for my absence. Thanks to all for their support and continued reading. To those Jon Snow fans, rest assured the man is coming. Chapter 73, Daenerys 7. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The immediate crisis seems to be over. She sent him an incredulous look, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. Really? You believe so? The gruff Stormlord grimaced. I will admit that the city will need repairing, but the fires are out and the populace is under control. Rather like applying a bandage to a leg wound after the head of the victim has been removed. The city will need a great deal of work, my lord, but the losses the population has endured cannot be measured in just coin and stone. Many have died in the flames. Death by fire is the purest death. Mokaro rumbled quietly from his place at the council table. Dany repressed a wince. It was precisely this sort of language that made her regret her decision to invite the man to attend the small council to offer his advice. As it was, the priest had no propriety, lacked any notion of diplomacy. He just sat there, listening to what others said around him, seemingly unwilling to venture his own opinion on what was going on both in the city and the wider realm. Comments such as this just made things even more awkward. Meryn, known as the Midge, chortled, I wouldn't venture on the street with that view, my friend. You're likely to be torn apart. The priest shrugged as if the notion was of little matter to him. All will be as the Lord of Light wills it. Dany looked down at the polished wood so that the other council members could not see her roll her eyes. It that all the man can offer. Religious platitudes. The commander of the city watch looked equally nonplussed. Jorah Mormont glanced uncertainly at the red-shrouded priest before addressing Dany. Khaleesi, in terms of controlling both the fire and the city, I must concur with the Lord Hand. The fires have been all but extinguished and the mob dispersed. The night paused. It was not easy and some of our patrols came under attack initially, but we have managed to reassert order. Were many injured in the fighting? Some, the knight said uncomfortably, though there were no fatalities on our side. And on the other? Dany asked pointedly. Mormont shifted uneasily, we are not sure. I believe some deaths would have been inevitable. Wonderful, so the city I have left will be full of a resentful populace. She stood from her chair and went to look from a nearby window. As Connington and Mormont had reported, the fires were extinguished, only a dull smoke rose from the city now to fill the morning air. She uttered a grief-laden sigh. Are we assisting with relief for the homeless? Connington cleared his throat. We are, your grace, though there are a great number of them. Dany turned back towards the table. I want everyone who needs assistance to receive it. Open up the Red Keep if you have to. The Stormlord bowed his head. It will be done, your grace. Relieved that the Lord Hand had not opted to fight her on this point, Dany gave a nod of thanks as she returned to her watch over the city. Her heart went out to the small folk who were trying to recover something from the tragedy. Some had lost their homes and business, others had lost loved ones. Husbands, wives, children, the flames, and spared no one they had encountered. Even the amount of injured needing care defied belief. We could also use other public spaces to act as a space for the healers and to house the homeless, Doran Martell suggested from his wheelchair, the Dragon Pit for example. I disagree, Connington replied. Our engineer's assessment of the building is that it is too hazardous to use without being subject to building work first. We wouldn't want any of the people killed by falling debris. Too true. Suddenly, Danny's brow furrowed. How would you know that? Why would engineers have been dispatched to the Dragon Pit? Lord Connington looked resigned as he met her eye. The king commanded that the pit be examined to determine the likelihood of housing your grace's dragons there. She looked for a moment, confusion dulling her mind. What is wrong with the Godswood? The Lord Hand's mouth twisted slightly. I believe that his grace was of the opinion that having the dragons in such a place is ill-fitting to their dignity. He made the comparison that you wouldn't tie your prize stallion outside while your hunting dogs are kept within the confines of your hall. His grace felt that we should look into reopening the pit and allow the dragons to be held there, like in times of old. As a sign of the power and prestige of House Targaryen, no doubt. I should add, Lord Connington added quickly, that such plans were considered in secret while the Golden Company was under the employ of the Lannisters and only briefly revisited since your grace's arrival in King's Landing. The liberation of the city from the usurper's spawn and the negotiations with Robb Stark have since taken priority. Dany nodded. I suppose that's natural. The image of Aegon babbling excitedly at housing the world-own living dragons in the space that had been purpose-built for them in King's Landing sprang into her head. The Queen wanted to get angry at her betrothed's presumption, but she found she didn't have the heart to be angry with her nephew. As much as it rankled, Aegon had proved himself invaluable during the fire. The youth had worked night and day to coordinate firefighting efforts, riding back and forth through the streets, corralling men, encouraging efforts and even, on occasion, pouring water and sand onto the flames with his own hands. When the council had devised the plan to create a buffer zones through which the fires would be denied fuel, it had been Aegon who had taken the lead, redoubling his efforts to make the plan a reality. Stories abounded about how his presence had lifted the people's spirits, and more than one tale saw the young king rescue trapped small folk from some burning building, risking his own life to bring yet another one of his people to safety. His work has done much to dispel the idea that we were responsible for the fire in the first place. Varys tells me that Aegon is being compared to a modern-day Rhaegar. Dany woke from her thoughts to see the council staring at her. Very well, she said abruptly. In the meantime, the pit remains closed to all. She sat back in her chair, felt the strong wood of the backrest as she pushed her spine against it. Now, on to other matters. Marwyn picked up a scroll that had been laid on the table in front of him. Marcellin's force of Unsullied and sellswords have entered the Kingswood on the other side of the Blackwater. With luck they should be through the woods and marching to assist Mossador within the next few days. Dany let forth a brief sigh. As soon as the fires had looked to be abating, Dany had ordered a relief force made up of 1,000 Unsullied and a sellsword company, known as the Mother's Sons, to march into the Stormlands to help the Unsullied commander Mossador in maintaining order in the region. It had been a risk. The fires were not yet out, but Dany could not risk losing the Stormlands. Mayhap Missandeia's two brothers can pacify the region quickly. If not, I'll have to send Connington with a larger force. That is good news, Dany said gratefully. Indeed, Connington agreed, we could certainly use some. Come now, my lord, Marwyn said, his tone light. While the destruction of parts of the city is terrible, the effects horrific, we must at least concede that some good may yet come from it. Now it is you who must watch his tongue. Maester Doran Martell rebuked the much larger man. I lost 3 nieces to the flames. Were my brother to hear you speak of good to come out of it, he would be certain to exact a most terrible price for the words. My apologies, Prince Doran, Marwyn said. I, of course, was not referring to the losses we ourselves have suffered. I was simply referring to the fact that the faith has been dealt with. Lord Varys reports that almost the entire upper echelon of the faith had been wiped away. The High Septon himself is gone, with nobody even remotely in place to fill the void. A potentially dangerous foe has been swept away. Doran's lip curled in contempt, but he said nothing further. He knows that Marwyn has a point, as awful as it is. If only such an event could have occurred without such loss of innocent life. While I abhor the deaths and destruction, Connington stated heavily, I must concur with the Maester that the fire has eliminated many of our foes within the city. With the death of the High Septon, organized resistance will fall apart completely. The faith may well reassert itself, Lord Varys murmured from his own seat, and I would fully expect the new High Septon to use the destruction of the September as a new rallying cry to oppose the Iron Throne. Connington looked unconcerned. By the time it takes for the faith to rebuild itself, we will reasserted our control of the city. There was a soft sound of silk rustling as Prince Doran leaned forward. I agree. The priority though will be to ensure that the reconstituted faith remains unarmed and uninvolved with worldly affairs. The recent events have shown that they can be a powerfully insidious foe should they wish to be so. There were nods around the table. Dany glanced about her. That is all very well and good, says, but I wish to return to the explosion at the Great September. Am I right in thinking that there is still no indication as to who is responsible for this tragedy? She cast one more look around the table. How can this be? Mormont looked at her. The man was as tired and haggard as she had ever seen him. Khaleesi, we are at a loss. No one seems to know anything. Though we must admit, Your Grace, that investigating the fire has been hampered by the efforts to extinguish the flames, Varys added glumly, his mouth tight. That was inevitable. Connington glared at the spymaster. We had other priorities. With the city in ruins, and Visneus Hill practically destroyed, there was no way for a proper investigation to take place. The spider did not reply. He simply nodded in tacit agreement to Connington's statement. I must find out what that man is thinking. Mormont ignored the other two speakers. He looked at Dany. It is beyond doubt that wildfire was used. The green flame is distinctive. I believe that now the fire is almost out, we can investigate more fully. Very well, Dany declared, though I want answers as soon as possible. Her words were met with another round of nods. Marwyn smiled as if at his own private jest as he looked over some other scrolls before him. While we are on the subject of the fire, he said as if eager to move the conversation on, the Alchemists Guild has petitioned for an audience. What does Hollin want now? Does their petition mention the reason for the request? No, Your Grace, Marwyn, though I suspect it might have something to do with the aid the Guild provided during the recent crisis. Some help, Mormont snorted. The bastards had no choice but to help us or they would have lost their own guild hall. I'm sure you're correct, Ser Jorah, the Archmaester assured him. Nevertheless, their request is there. The Alchemist Guild's power is nothing next to the power of the Lord of Light. Mokaro intoned harshly, mere children playing with powers they barely understand. Perhaps, Dany said carefully, lest her tone invite another sermon from the dark-skinned priest, but until Arla makes a request to see me himself, we must deal with our subjects as we find them. She turned her head to Marwyn. Invite the Wisdoms to send a delegation to me after the public audience tomorrow. The Master of Coin, Illyrio Mopethys, spoke next. Your Grace, I have something to discuss. She eyed him as she would an unappealing meal. Let me guess, Magister, we are perilously low on funds. The fat merchant bowed his swollen head, his jowls folding into what little she could see of his neck. He smiled apologetically. Your Grace jests, but the situation is now beyond serious. The Iron Bank's representatives hound my steps with a tenacity bordering on the fanatic. Dealing with such matters is your responsibility as Master of Coin, Lord Connington noted sharply. If you cannot handle the... I said nothing about being unable to handle the Iron Bank, Illyrio countered lightly, though his eyes had lost their humor, though I admit my efforts would be more fruitful if I had something worth saying. He's like a dog with a bone. We have had other priorities, Magister, Mormont said tiredly. In case you forget, the city was in great peril until very recently. I do not forget, the fat man replied, shifting his bulk in the heavy wooden chair that still creaked in protest at the weight it was being made to support. But I would be remiss in my duties if I did not keep Your Grace apprised about the continual demands of the bank. John Connington looked warily towards Daenerys before addressing the merchant. Now that the fire is almost dealt with, we can turn to issues of trade and taxation. That is something like putting the cart before the horse, my lord. Hand Marwyn noted heavily. I have studied the accounts. Dawn, the Stormlands and the Crownlands simply cannot raise enough funds to make sufficient repayment to the Iron Bank. Dany risked a glance at Connington and Prince Doran. Neither looked happy that the Maester had seemingly devalued the territories they controlled. She felt a pang of sympathy but knew that Dorne had never been considered a wealthy region and the Stormlands had been stripped bare of almost anything of value by Stannis Baratheon. I am aware of that, thank you, Grand Maester Mopethys said in a fierce tone, while putting special emphasis on Marwyn's title. Dany bristled. While it was obvious to her that Mopethys meant to insult the solidly built Maester, the merchant had obviously forgotten that the fact that Marwyn was not generally acknowledged as the Grand Maester, despite Dany and Aegon had declared him as such. That honor belonged to some old family retainer of the Starks. Such a sign was an acknowledgement that the Citadel supported the Starks and Tyrells rather than the Targaryens. It was a continual source of irritation, though a fairly minor one, in the grand scheme of things. She waved a hand dismissively. We will discuss this matter at the next council meeting. As Illyrio opened her mouth to speak, she spoke over him. The Magister is quite correct. Our finances are a cause for deep concern and need to be addressed. She smiled at the merchant. I would be obliged, Magister, if you were to lead that discussion. An honor, Your Grace. Mopethys bowed his head. The man seemed content with her words for the time being. There is one more matter that I believe we should discuss. Lord Connington addressed Dany. Now that the fire is out, I would suggest we return again to the matter of the alliance. My people are suffering, my lord, Dany said in a strained voice. Surely such discussion can wait until after we have at least begun our relief efforts. Such efforts can only be strengthened by an alliance. Varys observed. We will need material support from the Reach at least if we are to have any hope of recovery. Quite, Mopethys spoke up. And the sooner we can return to normal trade within the Seven Kingdoms the better. The man looked pain. Armies have a terrible way of draining resources at the best of times. Now, we can scarcely afford to feed the troops, much less care for the small folk. It is a far cry from when we first arrived and he was spreading money around like water. She paused as she went over her options. In truth, she wanted an alliance as much as the rest of her council, but signing such an agreement would require her and Aegon to marry as soon as possible and produce an heir that could be betrothed to the new Stark heir. Dany didn't want to think about what would happen when months of marriage refused to produce an heir, especially as Robb Stark had politely refused her proposal that Aegon wed his sister. I had hopes for that possible union. A child from a union between Aegon and the girl would have carried the lineages of House Targaryen and House Stark. If the young wolf and his Tyrell Rose still insisted that a union of heirs take place, then two cousins could marry and Dany's responsibilities would be at an end. It would have meant the eventual ebbing away of my power as queen as the Stark girl supplanted me as the mother of the heir. But I would have fought every step of the way and, after my death, I would have left the kingdom at peace and the family name restored. That would have been enough. She was about to speak when the sound of approaching footsteps cut off any sound from within the council chamber. The steady thump of boots on the stone floor caused Dany's heartbeat to increase. The sounds could only be that of a group of men headed their way. The council turned to look at the doors. Sir Barristan Selmy stood, moving closer to her side. He laid a hand on the pommel of his sword, clearly ready and willing to defend his queen should the need arise. Ser Jorah and Lord Connington also rose from their seats. The door burst open as a group of armed men arrived. At their forefront was King Aegon. Dany's betrothed looked hot, sweat beaded on his head, his complexion flushed. That being the case, he still looked resplendent in his form-fitting armor. His silver hair, with only the edges tinged with the blue dye he had used to conceal his true identity, hung loosely at his shoulders. What is this? Dany asked, more curious than frightened at the sight of Solidor at her doors. Try living with the Dothraki and you'll know what fear really is. The youth left his guards in the doorway as he stepped forward boldly and threw an unsealed scroll onto the council table. The parchment hit the wood dead center and bounced twice before coming to rest. Aegon's face was mottled red with rage. We are betrayed. The sound echoed in the confines of the council chamber, echoing off the walls until it dissipated. Jon Connington, a frown creasing his already weathered face, reached over the table to where the scroll had rolled to a stop. He picked it up quickly and proceeded to scan the document. As his eyes flit across the page, his mouth tightened, his mouth twisted into a grimace. Abruptly he looked up at his former ward, who was breathing heavily in anger. This is real. It's fucking real, all right. Aegon exclaimed. Scouts report that the Stark force has broken camp and is now coming this way. They are moving slowly, but they are coming. Dany froze. For a terrible moment she prayed she'd misheard her nephew, but a second look at the Lord Hand confirmed her fears. What's happened, my lord? Varys asked quickly, cutting through the stunned silence before anyone else could react. Robb Stark writes this, Connington replied, letting the scroll flutter slightly in his hands. At Dany's insistence he passed it over to her outstretched hand. She ignored the looks she received from the rest of the council as she brought the document up for scrutiny. Jon Connington started to speak, but he stopped when she raised a hand for silence. To Daenerys and Aegon Targaryen. From the first evening we met I have tried to keep an open mind about the proposal of an alliance between our two houses. There are many within Westeros who have deep-rooted feelings regarding the return of House Targaryen to our shores. Some believe that you mark a return to prosperity and plenty, focusing on the reign of Jaehaerys the Wise and Viserys the Young King. Others chose instead to recall the Dance of Dragons and the actions of the Mad King. For my part I was willing to walk the path of peace. I have already fought a war and know that the ballads and songs created by minstrels never truly reflect the horrors of conflict. I have learned from bitter experience that peace is always preferable to war. This is why I allowed our two factions to start discussions on a binding alliance. It is, with regret, that I must consider these discussions to be at an end. 2 nights ago, assassins who were in your service, entered my camp and attempted harm to my wife and child as they slept. While their attempts were thwarted, I cannot allow such actions to go unpunished. Since one of men was the leader of the attack, I have to assume that you are responsible for his actions. My family is everything to me. I fought a war to free my father and sisters and to reclaim my grandfather's lands. An attack on my beloved and our child must be met with equal, if not more, ferocity. It is clear to me now that the presence of your forces in the center of the Seven Kingdoms cannot be borne. I was willing to tolerate it if peace could be achieved. I fear now that it cannot. To that end, I offer you a simple choice. I ask you to surrender to me. Have your men surrender their weapons and open the gates of the city before midday, and there will be no cause for hostility between us. Every one of your men will be treated with civility and respect due to their rank. You yourself can leave these lands in peace. Return to Essos if you decide, with as many of your men who wish to follow. Not a single one of your faction needs fear unless it can be found that you are responsible for the attack on my queen. For those people there will be no mercy. If you choose not to surrender, then I will be forced to attack the city and drive your army from our shores. Such an action will bring destruction and suffering down on hundreds. I regret the necessity of this action, but, sometimes, the only peace to be attained is the one that can be found at the end of war. If that is the case, be in no doubt, I will fight it. You have to midday to decide. Robb Stark. The King in the North. She felt tendrils of fear grip her as she read over the letter. She handed it back to Connington, who proceeded to read it aloud to the council members. While he spoke his deep voice, Dany had a moment to herself to think over the situation. Someone tried to kill the Tyrell girl and her child. Who was responsible for this? She snuck a look around the council table. Surely not one of these. It's outrageous. Aegon practically shouted as Connington finished the letter. Clearly the effort of being silent while the council became informed of the content of Robb Stark's message had been too much for the young king. He is certainly overwrought, Your Grace. Varys spoke quietly, as I'm sure we all would be if our own family was attacked. Dany looked at the Master of Whispers. The small, plump man was eyeing her curiously. He seemed unhappy but also aware that the next few moments were crucial. I propose we send a delegation to Robb Stark, assuring him that we had nothing to do with the attack he mentions and confirming our good intentions. Which will start with the thorough investigation of whoever he claims was involved in this attack. Doran finished firmly. Aegon started, It makes no difference whether we know. Dany raised her hand again, urging calm. She eyed the council. Are we certain that no one in our faction had anything to do with this? The men around her looked puzzled. Some looked outraged and angry, others merely bemused, consumed by their own thoughts and suspicions. I am certain it was not one of my men, Your Grace, Doran uttered. So it's your men, is it? Aegon said, dangerously quiet, Not ours. The Prince of Dorne looked unmoved by his nephew's words. I meant no disrespect, Your Grace, only that I know that no Dornishman would attack a woman and child. Really? And what if your more irrational brother came to suspect that Robb Stark had something to do with the explosion at the September? With the deaths of some of the Sand Snakes, who knows what the Red Viper might do? He is, after all, a man who can hold a grudge. Just ask Gregor Clegane. I feel certain it was not any of the sellswords, Jon Connington stated from where he still stood. There would be no profit from sparking a conflict. That would seem to be a contradiction notion when applied to a sellsword, Marwyn observed slyly. I'd have thought that conflict would be most desirable to men that are paid to fight. They are paid just the same for sitting on their backsides as the money rolls in. Connington shot back, a flash of irritation crossing his face. Given the choice, they'd much prefer not to fight than to risk their lives in the hope of payment. True, the Stark presence has guaranteed them an income, but an all-out war is not something a lot of them would relish. And yet some of them might, Marwyn said with a slight smile. Perhaps, Connington allowed, but there would have to be some promise of additional payment. Besides, they are not the sort of people to act on their own initiative. Someone would have to pay them. Who on our side would have the necessary? Illyrio grumbled miserably. Dany almost screamed. Enough, my lords, enough. She gestured at the scroll. We must decide what to do about this, and quickly. What is there to decide? Aegon exclaimed. The wolf pup has shown his true colors. True colors? Vaes asked, frowning. Aegon looked at the spider as if confronted with a simpleton. Isn't it obvious? The Starks never intended to make peace with us. They have just waited till the right time in order to gather his forces and catch us unaware. No. Dany wouldn't believe it. She has sat across from Robb Stark. She had spoken to him, looked him in the eye, and believed the man sincere in his wish to form a pact with her house. He mentions an attack on his wife and child, Varys pointed out. There are few among us who would not seek vengeance for such an action. Again, could this be true? Dany asked. Could one of our men act on their own? An assassination attempt on Margaery Tyrell and the Stark Prince in the middle of an army encampment. Jon Connington said dismissively, hardly the work of a single person. A group then? Dany snapped, amended her question impatiently. Who is to say an attack actually took place? Aegon demanded, a passionate gleam in his eye. This story of an attack is likely nothing more than a pretext to attack us. Sir Barristan coughed lightly. The Starks are known throughout their realm for their honor. It is inconceivable that they would act in such a manner. Reputation be damned. They are coming, aren't they? What does that say for their honor? Aegon waved dismissively as he glanced around him malevolently. You've been fooled. All of you. While you sit here preaching peace and pacifistic, wooed by the Starks' talk of treaties and friendship, you've sat idle while our enemies prepare for war. An angry murmur went around the table. Connington was glaring at Aegon, his eyes blazing. Marwyn looked seriously towards Prince Doran, who seemed preoccupied with the patterns on the table's wooden surface. Varys pushed himself forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. He was tense as Dany had ever seen him. This is another plot, your graces, another move in the game our enemies are. Lord Varys. Dany cut him off sharply. Now is not the time. The eunuch's face told her that he felt it was the perfect time, but he bowed his head, frustration creasing his forehead. Dany could hardly blame him. He had admitted to her only the night before that he suspected foul play in the deaths of Cersei's children and of the former queen herself. Actions, the spider was sure, that had been committed by a traitor within the Red Keep. But, alas, he can produce no proof his accusations. Nor even a real idea of who the culprit might be. She took a deep, measured breath. She looked across at Aegon. What would you have us do, your grace? Her betrothed seemed beside himself. A letter such as this can only have one answer. We must ride out and meet the Stark host. With strength of arms? Doran Martell asked quietly. Of course. Aegon snarled, placing his hands on the table in front of him. We are under attack. It's the only logical response. A delegation Varys began. What about this letter do you not understand? Aegon cried, thumping a fist into the hardwood of the table. Stark demands either surrender or war. There is no other option. Jorah Mormont stood, a war will decimate us. The Starks are our equal in number. It is even possible they have more men than we do. If we come to battle, it will annihilate both sides. It's madness. If numbers were the only thing that matters, then yes, Aegon replied quite calmly, though his face flushed with boldness, but we have dragons. Dragons are not everything, your grace. Mormont shot back, looking at Dany imploringly. Ask Aegon the Conqueror, the king declared, he was wildly outnumbered on the field of fire, and looked what he achieved. Mormont was not deterred. Aegon and his sisters had 3 grown dragons that they could control and fly with skill. With respect, your graces, your dragons are powerful, but they are not old, or experienced, enough to attempt anything like what happened on the field of fire. Rubbish. Aegon snorted. They are young, I grant you, but we have a larger army than Aegon did. An army full of experienced sellswords and trained Unsullied. It balances out. With the right tactics we can hammer the rebels. Ser Jorah turned to the Queen. Khaleesi, I implore you, at least try to talk. Enough, Ser Jorah. Jon Connington nodded firmly. He turned to Daenerys and gave her a knowing look. His Grace is right on this. He gave the young king a wry glance, though his manner leaves a lot to be desired. This letter is a declaration of war. We cannot bow to it, nor can we talk our way out of it. The Stormlord looked regretful. We must put on a show of force. Let us march our armies out onto the field in battle formation. Show your dragons in all their glory. Dany felt dread coil in her gut. And what then? She demanded. What if we cross a line that we can't retreat from? We cannot retreat, Jon Connington stated evenly, his eyes cold. Surrendering the Iron Throne is not an option. The Starks have threatened us. The only avenue is to show them that, forcing them to see that war with us will be so costly, victory so unsure, that it is still worth talking. Aegon snorted impatiently. All eyes turned to her. It is being left to me. Dany's head started to pound. A vicious itch that felt like an animal inside her skull, clawing away behind her eyes. It gave her no respite as she exchanged glances with the men around her. She looked down. Deep in my heart I know this is a mistake. Once forces are arrayed on a battlefield, it would take either death or retreat to resolve the matter. Yet what choice do I have? I can't negotiate if the other side is unwilling, and the letter Robb Stark has sent me makes it clear that he has gone past the point of talking. What other option is left to me? Bend the knee. She felt her face grow tight. Never. Her head came up. Gather the armies. Have them take to the field to the north and west of King's Landing. She walked fast down one of the corridors of the Red Keep, the sound of her, as well as her escorts, steps swallowed by the noise of the activity going on all over the fortress. Everywhere she looked, soldiers were involved in preparations to march. March to what? That is the question. The unease she had been experiencing since she first looked at the letter had not disappeared. Her stomach roiled as she kept up a steady pace, refusing to look harried or stressed by outside influences. She kept her head locked as she stared at her destination, not giving anyone, or anything, a second glance. Your Grace. Dany grit her teeth in irritation. The man had been dogging her steps since she had left the council chamber. Yes, Lord Varys. She continued walking, not allowing the distraction to shorten her stride. Make it quick, I have much to do. She could not be certain, there was too much noise, but Dany was sure she heard a quiet snort of exasperation coming from the eunuch as he slid in effortless behind her. It is precisely because of your troubles that I find it necessary to speak to you, Your Grace. I'm sure it is. They arrived at the door to her bedchamber, the Unsullied guard snapping to attention in her presence. Very well, my lord. Come on in and speak to me. It's not like I have anything important to do today. The guards opened the door from her, admitting her into the large bedchambers that, she had been told, once belonged to Princess Elia of Dorne. She was given to believe that her good sister and niece had been killed in this very room. At first her servants thought she might be reluctant to stay in such rooms, but Dany had waved aside such objections. They have no idea I'd be more uncomfortable staying in my father's chambers or even my mother's. If what Sir Barristan says is true, then I am far less likely to want to sleep in the proximity to their shades. She indicated that her servants should leave. The waiting handmaiden curtsied immediately and quickly trailed out into an antechamber. The pair waited for the wooden door to thump closed before speaking. Their newly granted privacy allowing the Queen and her counselor to speak freely. What is it, Lord Varys? Speak quickly, for we are perilously short on time. The soft man looked at her earnestly. Your Grace, you must not march on the Stark army. Dany did not even attempt to repress her anger. I grow tired of people telling me what I must do. What would you have me do, my lord? Allow Robb Stark to threaten me and my people? A flicker of annoyance touched Varys's eyes. The bald man bowed his head. Your Grace, if the letter is right, then the Starks have been attacked in their own camp. What would you not do in such a situation? I wouldn't threaten my allies who are blameless of committing any such action. Dany pointed out haughtily. I would humbly submit that the young wolf has no way of knowing that. Varys noted quietly. As far as he is concerned, we are the only faction that mounts any kind of threat. He claims that one of the assassins was one of our men. I don't believe that. However, regardless of that, Dany allowed with a deep breath, I cannot allow an ultimatum of this kind to go unanswered. Perhaps not. Varys's voice was little more than a whisper. He looked at her with watery eyes. But, if your Grace will remember, I have submitted the idea to you before now that things are not as they seem at the moment. I have warned you about unseen threats. I remember. Dany snapped. You tell me that Cersei's children were murdered as part of some plot that connects to the explosion at the September. It is all very colorful, packed with intrigue and cunning. But, you will remember, that you have not provided one shred of proof of your claims. That is why I have forbidden you to bring the evidence to council. I will not have doubt and suspicion tear our faction apart. Not when our enemies are hell-bent on doing that for us. But your Grace. But nothing, my lord, Dany said dismissively. She felt tired, so very tired. I have an imminent threat again, the capital. That is real. Your plot has nothing. It is as insubstantial as wind. Even the wind can topple buildings, your Grace, Varys remarked slyly. Just because you cannot see a threat does not mean it does not exist. Is that the kind of unhelpful rhetoric you gave my father? No wonder he went mad. I grant you that absence of proof is not proof of absence. Dany replied carefully, but I can hardly take that to the council, to Aegon. The position is unchanged as it was earlier this morning. Varys looked briefly at the ground. Perhaps we can. Enough. Dany snapped, raising a hand, her patience exhausted. We have a meeting in an hour to confirm our plans. You have until then to gather what evidence you have and present it to the council. If they agree that an alternative course should be pursued, then there will be no argument about it from me. Varys said nothing. He gave a desultory bow and then quietly left the room. For a long moment, Daenerys did nothing. She listened to the sounds of hundreds of people busying themselves in the keep beyond her chamber walls. Sighing, she shook her head and returned to her business. An hour later she stood once more at the head of the council table. She was wearing light chainmail armor that had been especially crafted for her by a smith on Dragonstone. She had commissioned the clothing when she had liberated her house's ancient seat from the token garrison left there by Stannis Baratheon when he sailed away several moons ago. The smiths had worked long and hard in crafting the piece of form-fitting armor, and it had only arrived on the evening tide 2 days ago, the merchants willingly braving the city flames in order to claim their payment from the queen's servants. Until today she had not had the time to examine the piece. Even now she was uncertain how she felt about it. It was not as graceful looking as she would have liked, but she ventured that it would be light enough not to encumber her on Dragonback and yet protect her from any enemies that got too close or from missiles that would hurled at her as she flew by. At this stage I can ask for no more than that. At her side stood King Aegon, her nephew and betrothed. Her brother's son was wearing fine red-black armor that shone darkly and contrasted with the silvery hair that loosely came down to his shoulders. On the table in front of him was a helm crested with the head of a dragon. Her nephew looked every inch the image of a Targaryen ruler. Let us hope he is more like his namesake than some of the others of our bloodline. Around the table were the rest of their generals and commanders. Jon Connington stood at Aegon's right hand. He wore the colors of his house and the badge of his position displayed prominently on his chest. Next to him were the other commanders of the Golden Company, the Archer, Black Ballock, the exiled knight Tristan Rivers, and even Franklin Flowers, the tough brute who would not look out of place as a guard of a whorehouse rather than as a commander of a king's army. To her left stood the knights Sir Jorah Mormont and Sir Barristan Selmy. Both had seen more conflicts and combat in Westeros than anyone else at the table, and Dany was aware that their advice would be invaluable. Next to them was Grey Worm, the commander of all her unsullied left in King's Landing. He stood rigidly at attention, silently watching events, examining the map spread out on the table in front of them. His eyes were alert as he took in the topography that he and his men might soon have to fight over. At a complete contrast to Grey Worm were Dany's sellswords and the captain of her Dothraki screamers. The commanders of the Second Sons, Windblown and Storakrau surveyed the room, looking like they knew their business. As well they should. This is what we pay them for. Daario Naris stood casually among his fellow sellswords. He caught Dany's eye and smirked in her direction. She didn't have to fight to contain her blushes as she had in the past. The situation was far too serious to warrant the indulging of lustful whims. Even so, she had to admit that the sellswords was a damn handsome man. The final links in the human chain around the table, connecting the sellswords to the Golden Company, were made up of Doran and Oberyn Martell. The Red Viper was wearing the same bronze leather armor he had fought the Mountain in. His brother Doran remained in his ever-present wheelchair. Everyone knew that the ruler of Dorne would do no fighting today, but no one had the courage to even attempt to dismiss him. Not with Oberyn standing at his side, a grim dangerous glint in his eye. There were some commanders missing from their gathering, of course, Victorian, Mossador, even Marcelin, but they were off on other duties within the Targaryen territories and were not immediately at hand. Dany prayed that the thousands of soldiers they had elsewhere would not be needed today. Varys was also absent. She did not know what to make of that. "My lords," Connington intoned loudly as he brought the meeting to order, "my thanks for gathering on such short notice. The Storakraus are ready to obey the Queen's command, morning, noon and night," Daario promised with a lewd wink at Dany. "Damn him, does he not realize how serious the situation is?" Connington nodded firmly at the sellsword before he returned to addressing the table. "As you all know, time is of the essence. The Stark army broke camp just after dawn this morning." He indicated the message they had received earlier that day, just before this declaration was sent to us. The middle-aged knight grumbled, "Some of you know the terms Stark is offering us. Some of you do not. All you need to know that is that the King and Queen mean to reject the offer and resist any attempt by the Starks to force us to comply." There was a rumble of agreement around the table, though Dany notices that the Martells looked unhappy. "Early reports," Connington went on, "indicate that the Starks have broken camp and are marching in this direction." He pointed to a block of wood on the map that represented the Stark camp. "They are fanning out to the east and west, loosely keeping the King's Road at their center." He indicated to a servant who stepped forward and added small blocks of wood to the main Stark piece and spread them out in a rough line. "It's our belief," the Hand continued, "that the Stark force will head south to a ridgeline a short distance from King's Landing. Beyond that will be open, sloping ground, all the way to the city. The Starks will surely hold the defensive ridge until they have our answer." "Answer?" Brown Ben Plum, the sellsword captain of the Second Sons, asked. His broad, weathered face twisted in curiosity. "The Starks have given us till midday to respond to their message," Connington replied, not missing a beat. "We propose to be in position by then to counter their next move." He gave them all a sterner look. "Stark must be made to realize the colossal folly he will commit should he offer us battle." There was another chorus from the commanders. Like a pack of jackals, following the leader. John Connington indicated that the servants should start to move the wooden block representing the Targaryen army out of the city and began to spread them in an L shape both west and slightly north of the city. Doran Martell coughed lightly. "What is the intention of this maneuver? Do you mean to just draw yourselves up against the Starks and stare each other down?" The Hand of the King gave the wheelchair-bound man a knowing look. "Our aim to give the Starks pause. To demonstrate to the young wolf how powerful an army we have and how we will not cower simply because he had a bad day." A laugh went up from the sellswords. The Prince of Dorne cradled his hand in his lap. "And what if the Starks call your bluff?" "It is not a bluff," Egon declared soberly. "If the young wolf dares bring his forces any closer than the ridge, we will act to defend ourselves. Fire and blood." "I have no doubt that seems like wisdom," Doran replied calmly, "but offering battle here presents all kinds of risk." Connington looked grim. He raised both his hands in a placating gesture. "I assure you, my prince, that we do not believe it will come to a fight. At the moment the Stark boy is consumed with anger and bravado. When he sees we will not be intimidated, he will back down." "I'm sure there were those who said the same thing about Robert Baratheon." Doran smiled thinly. "We know what happened there." "Well then, cooler heads on his side will prevail," Connington doggedly persisted. "He talks with confidence, but he does not fool me. This man is not a politician, he's nervous, only putting up a brave front for the men. Doran said coolly, but, in case they do not, who will be in charge of the ensuing battle? The crippled man looked towards his nephew. You, your grace. Everyone looked in expectation at the young king. However, if they thought that Egon was too far gone in his desire for power, they were to be disappointed. No, Egon said firmly. He glanced to his side. The commander for this battle, should it come to that, will be Lord Connington. A faint ripple of surprise went around the room. His Grace has delegated this role to me, the hand confirmed, and Queen Daenerys concurs. She nodded firmly at the group, eager to ensure that they all understood that this was her will. Egon and I intend to be atop our dragons. We'll be all over the battlefield, best that there is someone at the center who can give the necessary orders. Better yet, orders that will come from an individual who has fought a proper West AOC battle before. In this capacity, Connington declared, pointing to the map, I have set out the position as follows. I will be to the west of the city, along with the Golden Company and the warriors from Dorne who will be commanded by Prince Oberyn. The Red Viper did not react, simply nodding at the acknowledgement of his role. To the north of the city will be the Unsullied and the remainder of the sellswords. Connington paused as the servants added yet more tokens onto the map. Each group will maintain its captain but will receive its orders from an overall officer. In the center, Sir Barristan Selmy will command. Not Ser Jorah. Daario Naharis observed in mock astonishment. I'd have thought he'd have been on the front lines with the rest of us. Mormont glowered at the sellsword. There was no love lost between the two. Indeed, they had disliked each other almost since the day they met in Essos. Dany stepped forward. Ser Jorah is in charge of the city garrison. A position of vital importance. Importance? Daario snorted skeptically, hiding behind the city walls whilst the rest of us to prepare for battle. On the contrary, Connington cut in, Ser Jorah will serve a pivotal role should we actually come under attack. He is needed in the city. So you say, Daario replied as if the matter was of no great importance to him. Good, the hand stated firmly. Now let me outline my plan. The council chamber was nearly empty. The only people still in attendance were the king and queen, with their three main battle strategists, Jorah Mormont, Barristan Selmy and Lord Connington. The other commanders had been dismissed so that the final rushed preparations could be made to the hastily conceived plan of action. The old knight looked apologetically at Jon Connington, who stood rigidly at the table. I do not mean to insult, Lord. Then what do you mean? Egon snapped angrily. We have only an hour before the deadline. If you have a problem with the strategy, you'd best tell us now. The strategy is sound, your grace, Barristan allowed. It had better be, Ser Jorah observed. We are hopelessly outnumbered. How is that possible? Egon snarled. We have at least 30,000 men here. Not counting the forces we have elsewhere. We do have those numbers, Mormont conceded, but you forget that the young wolf has the combined power of the North, Reach, Riverlands and the Vale at his disposal. Egon gestured at the map. What forces Stark had were split when he sent an army north to reclaim his homeland. Plus, he must be leaving a garrison to secure both the Westerlands and the Iron Islands. Even so, Mormont grumbled. The scouts report that we... Nonsense. Egon shook his head. I fear that Ser Jorah is quite correct. The smooth voice came to them as Lord Varys glided into the room without any noise at his entry beyond the sound of his voice. Dany's eyes blazed with anger. Where the hell has he been? Egon's fire matched her own. What do you mean? The eunuch offered a perfunctory nod of the head to Dany's nephew. My little birds tell me that Robb Stark has an army of approximately 50,000 approaching the city. The hand paled visibly. So many? He said, his voice cracking. How is that possible? Egon asked. The king too looked perplexed by the numbers. It would appear that the young wolf has not been idle since he arrived in the Crown Lands. Varys said simply, the Vale, Riverlands and Reach have been emptied of forces with only small armies left behind to protect them. Dany was appalled. How could they gather so quickly? The eunuch looked uncomfortable. I would surmise that the Starks have been gathering their forces for some time now. Pulling forces in slowly. Certainly Lord Tarly had been recalled from the Western Campaign and the Blackfish has been summoned with reinforcements from Riverrun. Bastards used the birth of the Stark child as an excuse to summon their forces, Egon claimed angrily. We thought nothing of a gathering and feast to celebrate the arrival of an heir. I believe that the Starks merely acted cautiously. Varys replied carefully. I do not believe their intent was to muster for an attack. And yet here we are. Aegon's tone was hateful, full of rage and anger. The group took this in. Everyone around the table looked chastened by the news. We assumed we'd match the Starks' numbers. Or at least their advantage would be small enough that the dragons could make up the shortfall. There was a distinct aura of hurt betrayal on Aegon's face. Dany suspected she knew the reason for He-Man's anger. He never wanted the peace proposed by Varys. It took Connington and Prince Doran to talk him into it. And then, just when it come to believe there may be wisdom in the action, the Starks looks to have betrayed us all. The king went still. We still have dragons at our disposal. That must be worth the extra men we are outnumbered by. Dany felt eyes upon her. Selmy and Mormont had told her many times that her dragons were still young and unused to combat. For herself, she was not sure if Drogon could be controlled in such a chaotic environment as battle. Viserion was much the same. As for Rorgal, the green-colored dragon had refused all commands of late, only obeying slightly when the dragon horn was used to rouse him into action. To put such creatures into service in such circumstances here would be foolhardy. But what choice is there? The group took this in. Everyone around the table looked chastened by the news. If it is of any consequence, Your Grace, Varys reported, I have confirmed that the attack on the Starks was real. Queen Margaery and Prince Ricard were attacked by assassins as they slept. The assassins were killed before they could murder their targets. All were slain, but, unfortunately, the evidence has pointed towards Your Graces as the culprits behind the scheme. Dany blinked. How? Varys pursed his lips. The lead assassin was known to us. He has been identified as Lysan Omer. What? Jon Connington exclaimed. The man looked stricken. You must be mistaken. There is little chance of that, I fear, Varys replied. I have had my birds perform a quick search of the city and the Golden Company's encampment. Lysan Omer has not been found. Impossible. The Hand proclaimed, even if you're right. Why would he be involved in a plot to kill the Starks? I confess that on the face of it, it makes little sense, Varys soothed, his face the picture of puzzlement. Lysan Omer was a loyal member of the Golden Company. His actions were usually dictated by his employers. The eunuch looked directly at Aegon and Dany. By Your Graces, not to put too fine a point upon it. Have a care, my lord. Aegon stormed. I may not have liked the Starks, but I would never stoop to murder a mother and child. Dany examined him. I believe him, not after what happened to his own mother and sister. Even so, Varys went on, you can see why the Starks have reached the conclusion they have. Joffrey, Tommen were under our guard and now both them are dead. A suicide and an accident. Aegon shouted. Perhaps, but the fire at the September and the deaths of Cersei and Myrcella were most certainly not. Varys' head tilted. If we examine the evidence objectively, it seems that the enemies of House Targaryen are being removed one at a time. The only one remaining after the fire was the Starks. Now it appears that someone under your command has tried to murder them. Aegon looked thunderstruck, his breath came in ragged bursts. It was not I. He looked at Dany. You must believe me. We are being framed. Set up by someone who desires war between our factions. He drew up short. What, if the Starks planned all this themselves? They killed Cersei and her children, blew up the September, and then blamed it on us. Varys looked bemused, though his expression was tinged with a measure of impatient disdain. For what purpose, Your Grace? To undermine us. Aegon exclaimed, to make us seem as bad as our forefathers in the minds of the small folk. He started to pace as he pondered through his own suggestion. Yes. I see it now, the Starks want to make us seem like monsters. Child killers. As wonderful as watching your mind work is, Your Grace, Varys interjected with annoyance, but that would suppose that our own forces are infiltrated to such a regard that the killings and the fire were done in such a way that not one of our loyal men saw it happen. But Aegon began. Next Varys went on as if the king had not spoken. The Starks would have had to abduct Lysan Omer and stage an attempted assassination on their own queen and prince. That could have just been a farce as well. Aegon said enthusiastically, we have no one but the Starks' word that it happened. My spies have seen the body, Varys stated, it is undoubtedly his. Well, he was abducted then, the king replied heatedly. The fire would be the perfect cover to effect a kidnapping. To what purpose? Varys asked quizzically. As Aegon started to form a response, the eunuch turned to address Dany. Your Grace, you and I both know that Robb Stark was willing to negotiate an alliance with us. If he was not, then he simply could have attacked when he arrived and taken his chances on the field of battle. True, it would have been a risk, but our force was divided and the city not fully secure. Stark didn't expect to find us here, Aegon reasoned. The bastard expected to find the remnant of the Lannister army, not a newly arrived force from Essos. He needed to buy time to pull together his forces and gather intelligence on our army. That done, he's invented a pretext to attack us. One that will justify his actions to the people. Why then not recall Lord Eddard? Varys asked wryly. Granted, Lords Tarly, Royce and Tully are able commanders, but why leave a veteran force in the north when they could be of use here? Roose Bolton is dead, the rebellion ended. Why not wait for the Warden of the North? A man that both the Dornish and Ironborn respect. The Fire, Aegon said flatly. King's Landing is partially destroyed, our defenses weakened, our men tired. Stark will never have a better chance. Whatever the truth, Lord Connington's firm voice cut off Varys' response, it changes very little. If the Starks were the victims of an assault, then their marching on us could be seen as justified. If this is a scheme of their own making, then their attack is based on a falsehood. Either way, they are coming. Barristan and Jorah nodded. It was this that rallied Dany's mind. As long as these two are by my side, we may yet find our way through. She turned to her hand. What do you suggest, my lord? Orders have already gone out, but they can be altered. Or rescinded, Jorah Mormont suggested. Dany blinked. Rescinded? Yes, your grace, Sir Jorah responded firmly. Against numbers such as this, perhaps it would better to withdraw. Cowardice. Aegon raged. You'd give up the Iron Throne. Better that than have it taken from us by force, Mormont advised, looking grimly down at the map. I agree with Lord Connington. The circumstance of how we came to be here are irrelevant at the moment. We need to deal with the imminent threat. I do not believe we can hold here. We can retreat into the Stormlands. Reunite with Mossador's men. Storm's End has never fallen to an attack. We could hold out there indefinitely. Aegon glowered, and wait to starve. Like Stannis Baratheon did in the rebellion. No, Mormont declared, thinking aloud as he traced a finger over the map. We can order Mossador to take his army into the Reach, backed up by the reserve force from Dorne. Hit them at Ashford or Longtable and then maybe press on to Highgarden itself. At least it will force the Stark host to deplete its forces to counter the threat whilst their main army advances on the Stormlands. Why not just do that now? Aegon inquired hotly. No time, your grace, Sir Jorah. We could send messages at once, but a diversionary attack could not be mounted before Robb Stark gets here. But, even in the Stormlands, the numbers against us would still be the same, Dany reasoned. Any troops sent to counter us in the Reach would be replenished by the northern forces currently with Ned Stark. Jorah Mormont looked pensive. If we have get pushed from the Stormlands, we can go south to Dorne. No force has ever been able to invade and then hold the land of the Martells. You forget, Sir Jorah, Connington said thoughtfully. It would mean abandoning Victorian Greyjoy and our Crown Lands force in the east. Send them a message, my lord, Mormont countered. Have Lord Victorian sail the Iron Fleet and as many Crown Lands men as he can carry, and have him sail south along the coast. You cannot be serious. Aegon spluttered. Abandon King's Landing, the Crown Lands. It has benefits, your grace, Sir Jorah said stubbornly. It would lengthen their supply lines while shortening ours. King's Landing is a ruin at present. Let the Starks and Tyrells deal with restoring the city, repairing the damage and haggling with the Iron Bank while we move south and shore up our defenses. Your plan, Connington spoke slowly, is not without merit. However, I believe you miss a crucial point. If we abandon the city and the region, we will lose face amongst our men and the realm at large. The sellswords won't act without pay, and the Crown Lands men will not relish being taken from their homelands. I also doubt that the Ironborn will stay loyal, given we will be unable to guarantee them a chance to liberate the Iron Islands. You speak of people who have sworn us loyalty, Aegon reminded his former mentor. Quite so, Connington answered, not lifting his head from the map. However, words are wind. Loyalty counts for very little when confronted with hungry bellies and empty purses. We will never be able to pay our soldiers if we head to the Stormlands. He eyed Mormont, much less in Dorne. Mormont nodded, but such a move would buy us time to discuss matters with the Starks. Resolve this issue of the assassination attempt. He doesn't believe we can win this fight. Sir Barristan Dany turned to her old retainer. You are an experienced fighting man. What do you think of our options? The aged knight looked perplexed. Uncomfortable with her asking his judgment. Abruptly, the man remembered his duty and gathered his thoughts. Your Grace, there is much to what Ser Jorah has said. Retreat may be the best tactical option. The man paused, took a deep breath. However, Lord Connington has the right of it. Tactical or not, a withdrawal will seem like a retreat in the minds of the small folk. The young wolf has been winning battle after battle across the realm. Leave now, surrender the Iron Throne to him, and you will be seen as running away. The people will never call you Queen and King then. So Dany's voice was quiet. It seems we either stand up to the Stark army now and try to force them to terms, or we withdraw. And possibly surrender my birthright. The thought sent waves of anger through her. Who is Robb Stark to tell the dragon what to do? I have kept faith throughout the negotiations. I had to quell my desire to rule in the name of peace and prosperity. True, I believe Robb Stark believes what he is doing, but if he means to make his family safe by threatening mine, then his intentions run contrary to mine. And that is a dangerous place to be. She regarded the hand. Lord Connington, can we hold this city? The Storm Lord looked resolute as he matched her stare. I believe we can, Your Grace. Our plan has every chance of success. Though their numbers are greater than ours, if we manage to catch them as I devised, then we can destroy them. At the least, the Lord gave a smile, we can give them a bloody nose they won't soon forget. Dany's eyes swept left. She noticed that neither Sir Barristan or Jorah Mormont were swayed by the hand's words. Still, there was no other option. Then take command, my lord. Dany smiled grimly at Aegon as she felt a terrible weight descend on her. I agree with my betrothed. We must stand fast against aggression. We know we have done nothing wrong. We are the dragon. The young wolf will find that the dragon not does kneel, does not surrender. The warriors bowed before her and marched out of the room, leaving her alone with Varys. She caught the man's eye. You disapprove, my lord. It is not my place. Quite right, Dany hissed, though she quickly went quiet. I am not angry at him. Just at the situation I find myself in. But still you believe this is wrong. I do, Your Grace, Varys said mournfully. Taking to the battlefield presents only two options. Either fight or flight. If Robb Stark wanted to talk about the events of 2 nights ago, he had just to ask. Dany spat. He could have sent a delegation and we could have gotten to the bottom of this. As allies should. I believe Robb Stark has little choice, Varys murmured. After such an attack, an attempt to negotiate with us would be seen as a crucial weakness amongst his bannermen. I have no doubt that some on both sides rejoice that the talk is over and battle can begin. He gave a regretful smile. Indeed, I suspect that it was only the strength of Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell that kept the people in line this far. The eunuch pondered for a moment, and the fear of dragons, of course. For the first time she realized how little she knew about this little man who advised her. He was a curious creature. If we survive this, I'll have to get to know him better. She looked fully into his face. Do you truly believe there is some other person or people responsible for bringing us to this juncture? I do, Your Grace. The man's eyes never wavered, nor even blinked. I am certain of it. Then find them, Dany ordered. For all that I have said, I value peace, Lord Varys. If we can find out who is responsible for the attack, then maybe we can stop this without loss of life. I appreciate your trust in me, Your Grace. Varys bowed, but it will take time. She rounded on the squat man. Time, Lord Varys, is in very short supply. I suggest that if you are going to do something, you do it quickly. She cast a side eye out of an open window that overlooked the northern section of the city. Otherwise there will be no recourse left to us but war. Notes. Apologies all that this took so long, real life getting in the way. Next up will be the battle for King's Landing. It's an enormous chapter, by far my longest thus far. Won't be too long till it's up ~d. Chapter 74, The Battle for King's Landing. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Robb I. His horse moved beneath him. the beast's heavy breath causing calm sensations as it passed through the animal's large body. The inhalation was steady and regular. If the beast was unnerved by the sounds and movement of the army all about it, then it gave no sign. A well-trained animal, one of Willa's fine. Ironic that a man who was disinclined with riding because of his injury would breed such magnificent animals. He sat easily in the saddle and watched as his soldiers marched out on either side of him, like the source of a river that disgorged water across the land. The steady rhythmic thud of the men's heavy boots striking the muddy earth, along with the soft clatter of hundreds of weapons on armor that accompanied every movement, was curiously comforting. He glanced down. No danger of my own armor making any noise. He raised a gauntlet to look once again at the exquisite Valyrian steel armor that had been a gift of Lord Randyll Tarly. The metalwork was so finely intricate and yet so ridiculously lightweight, that he might as well have been wearing a silk robe. He felt odd, as if he had come to the battle wearing only his undergarments, so little did he feel the weight of the armor. He had worried that such an item was more for show than protection. Yet he had stood on the parade ground by the royal enclosure and watched as Sandor Clegane had struck at the armor as it lay strapped against a training dummy. Again and again the massive warrior swung his great sword at the metal, only for his blade to bounce off harmlessly. Finally, when the squires had removed the armor from the dummy, the small group that had gathered to watch the display all saw that the wooden stump below was unblemished by the hound's steel. The assembled group was shocked by the lack of damage. The only one not surprised was the Lord of Hornhill, who stood watching the demonstration with a rare smile. Truly, the king thought as he looked over the armor, a wondrous item. The one thing the armor lacked was a helmet. Euron Greyjoy had not been wearing one when he was killed, nor was one found among the possessions on his ship or in his chambers on Pike. Lord Tarly had spent some time searching but had eventually surrendered, assuming that Euron had never found an accompanying piece to match the rest. Undeterred, Robb has added a helmet that had been especially crafted by the blacksmiths of the Vale. Anya Waynwood had begged her family to present to him a helm crafted of the finest metal, with its face shaped into that of a wolf's head. With that, and the long wolf pelt that acted as a cloak, he looked the part of the name by which his men had come to know him. The young wolf. Today though, he did not feel young. He felt that he had aged decades since the night his wife and son were attacked. He resisted the urge to look behind him. There was no way he could see the retreating carts and escort that marked his wife and son's journey to Antlers. They had left, along with Sansa, Catelyn, Olenna and Willers, northbound on the King's Road back towards the safety of Antlers. There to rest a night and to await word on the events of today. The group were surrounded by over 200 soldiers and servants with orders that, should the battle go ill, they were to push past Antlers and not stop before reaching Riverrun. Once safely there, they were to send messages to Winterfell. Robb knew that, no matter what happened to him, his father would ensure that the family was cared for. Robb felt a shiver go down his spine. He shook himself, determined to cease such maudlin thoughts. I can't afford such distractions today. I need to focus on today's task. My family is safe from harm. He smiled as a thought struck him. Though I won't be when Margaery regains her full faculties. She will be enraged she was sent away. Thankfully the Wolf Guard escorting her have firm instructions not to turn back without word from myself. There's no danger of Margaery or anyone else overriding my command. Robb cast an eye towards the city, but enough procrastination, on to matters at hand. The sun was rising in the sky. Robb estimated that it would soon be midday. He turned his head. I assume we have had no word. Daisy Mormont stirred from atop her own mount. No, your grace. Though the Targaryen army continues to march. So I see. Robb changed his gaze to the south to the high walls of King's Landing. He watched impassively as soldiers marched out of the northern and western gates, the soldiers spreading out as they cleared the entranceways to join their fellows who had now broken camp and were awaiting their comrades on the fields outside the city. By the king's own measurement he guessed that House Targaryen had many thousands of warriors arrayed against him. Nearly their entire army. Just as my scouts informed me. The king sighed. I knew that sending word to Aegon and Daenerys was a calculated risk. Many of his bannermen had been outraged that he would declare his intentions and give potential enemies the time to prepare themselves. Now it looked as though his general's fears were right. The Targaryens had taken to the field with almost every soldier available to them. He looked left and right, saw the many thousands of his own army spread out across the plain as far as the eye could see. For the first time he had gathered forces from all 4 of the regions that had pledged allegiance to him. Some were more numerous than others, but Robb had never commanded the Knights of the Vale or the soldiers of the Reach in battle before. Granted, Garlon and Margary had brought their own small detachments with them when they joined him at Riverrun, and their men had subsequently fought with him across the Westerlands and at Harrenhal, but never before had he seen so many soldiers, had so many at his command. To the west, Lord Randil Tarly had drawn his own men up in tight formation. The men's armor and weapons points gleamed in the midday sun. Though he was hardly objective, he believed Lord Randil host to be an impressive sight. Almost as impressive as the host of Vale Knights who were positioned to the east. They too looked ready and eager to impress the king to whom they had recently pledged their service. He saw the Ivermen, 2,000 strong, under the command of Lord Blackwood, standing straight and tall, their rearmoured ranks containing some of the finest archers under Robb's command. They looked pensive but determined. The young wolf could hardly blame them. Uncertainty breeds anxiety. And there is nothing more uncertain than what the gods have in store for us today. Around Robb was his Northmen, many of whom had fought and bled with Robb in the northern campaign. Whilst the king's father had taken the vast majority of the northern army home to fight the Boltons, the man around Robb had opted to stay. They were among Robb's most loyal and battle-hardened men. Many were members of the Wolf's Guard, having passed the punishing tests that Brian of Tarth had created for her hand-picked unit of warriors. The king took a moment to admire the formation and readiness of the troops under his flag. I had hoped that battle would not be necessary, that a show of force would be enough to make the Targaryens come to heel. He watched as the Targaryen army continued to move. It looks as if the dragons have the same idea as I. Mixed feelings warred for prominence in Robb's mind. He had no desire to watch his men fight and die. Indeed, he wondered at the whims of fate that led him to be here at all. I set out from Winterfell to rescue my father and sisters. Now, I sit at the head of a massive army preparing to attack a returned Targaryen force to capture a throne I had never seen until recently and take a position I do not want. He cursed inwardly. What were the Targaryens thinking? Had they had a bit of patience, we would have signed the alliance and they could have kept their blasted chair and the regions that have pledged themselves to their service. His eyes grew cold. But, no, they make a play for it all and try to murder my wife and child. That is an ambition that will cost them dearly. In his heart, Robb had trouble believing that Daenerys would have been involved in a plot to kill his wife and child. He had spent a lot of time with her of late and had been impressed with her mind and warmth. Granted, she was a young person in an adult's world, but he felt a kinship with her. It seems I was mistaken. Robb considered. Perhaps Daenerys always coveted more than I offered. Or maybe she started the discussions in good faith and then had her head turned by thought of power. Robb was aware of how easy that would be. I know all about being thrust into a position of power while still very young. Gods be good, I know all about that. I just don't know. He paused. Or maybe I'm simply a poor judge of character. What he did know, however, was that the bad faith of the Targaryens was undeniable. The Lannisters had been all but wiped out. Children murdered for the simple crime of their birth. Then the destruction of the Great September, the deaths of hundreds killed in a great conflagration, seemingly because they would not bend the knee to the dragons. He had offered help and assistance many times and been rebuffed. And lastly, the final straw, the attempt on Margary and Ricard's lives by a member of the Golden Company, their spymaster if the imp told it true. If the assassination attempt had come in a void, then Robb would have been prepared to listen. But, after the last few months, he could take it no more. Gods know I wasn't meant to be a diplomat. If it hadn't been for Margary, then I might never have even considered an alliance. There have been too many accidents and deaths to believe that it isn't one big plan. Whose though? That was the question. Willers Tyrell had fought valiantly to keep the diplomatic option alive. He had argued with Robb for hours, respectful but insistent that his king hear his arguments. Robb had listened, more out of duty to his wife's house than in any actual belief in his good brother's words. He had let Willers lay out the folly of combat at this stage. His points had been sound, well presented, but in the end the heir to Highgarden had been unable to answer a simple question. If Daenerys and Aegon didn't send the spymaster, then who did? The crippled man had looked at him through tired eyes. There are many who might have commissioned the act. Stannis, for example. No one has heard of him for months, Robb replied dismissively. He seems to have left the Seven Kingdoms long behind. Willers was not put off. There are some rivals within the Targaryen camp itself who may have acted without their ruler's consent. Prince Doran might have seen the benefit of attempting to kill Margaery and your son. Lord Connington might thirst for revenge after his exile during Robert's rebellion. Even Varys could be playing a long game. Robb was unconvinced. You think any of them would act without the Targaryens say so? It's possible, Willers said doggedly. How would we know unless we open up a dialogue and ask? And what will they say? Robb snapped. Do you believe they would hand either of them over even if somehow we can prove their guilt? Connington and Prince Doran command a large amount of the Targaryen army. Surrendering them to us will lose support from their own side. If it was Aegon himself, then they'd lose half their army at a stroke. The Martells won't surrender their blood, and Connington won't surrender his ward. Robb crossed his arms. No, my lord, they will not hand over the leaders of their own faction. Willers rubbed his temples. Your Grace, there must be a better response than an ultimatum. It backs the Targaryens into a corner. They'll have no option. What choice do you think I have? Robb almost shouted. My wife and child were almost killed. If I do nothing, then my men will think me weak and defenseless. Many of them were already unhappy with an alliance with House Targaryen. But now, after they attack my family, our family, how could they follow a man who allows his family to be attacked with impunity? Too easy, Your Grace, Willers chided stubbornly. You are beloved by the men. Even by my countrymen and those of the Vale who have never fought beside you. The Starks have the common touch, and all of us, high and low-born, feel affection for you. They would follow any order you give. Not all of the people love my family. Robb pointed out angrily. Some people would do anything to be rid of us. His tone became dangerous. Even contrive in the death of my infant son. Willers hung his head. He took a deep breath. I know you, Grace. Believe me, I know. Do you think me indifferent to an attack on my sister and nephew? He shook his head. No. If there was proof the Targaryens were behind it, I would support you with all my heart. He stopped, silent until Robb looked up at him. But we don't know, Your Grace. They could be utterly uninvolved. Robb shook his head. Someone in that city is most certainly involved. You believe that members of the Golden Company just happened to launch an assassination attempt of their own accord? His eyes grew cold. No, I will not believe it. Not after everything that has happened. An attack on my family cannot be borne. If I was to do nothing, it could encourage our foes to try their luck again. He felt anger course through him. That I will not allow. I will have vengeance for this. Justice must be done. Your Grace, It is too late, Willers, Robb replied, looking down at some dispatches by way of dismissal. The letter will be sent tomorrow. It is time for you to leave. Reluctantly, Willers hobbled to the entrance to the king's tent. He paused by the entranceway, giving the king a sad look. Justice against the innocent is no justice at all. With that he left the king to his own thoughts. Now, with two armies spreading out around him, he wondered, not for the first time, if he was on the right course. He looked upwards to see the sun streaming down on them. Midday. As I told you, Willers, it is too late now. Sighing, he turned in his saddle. Order the advance. Dany. The sound of distant war horns distracted her. Her hand jerked away from petting Drogon's large elongated face. They are coming. She brought her forehead to the rough-scaled skin and embraced the mighty animal. She tried to convey her love for the creature with her touch. Missandei approached from behind her. Horns, Your Grace. I have ears. Thank you, Missandei. Dany gave the scribe a grateful smile as she released her hold on the dragon's head and quickly walked around to the back of the beast as it lay peaceably on the grass of the clearing. She quickly set a foot on a hard scale and boldly lifted herself onto Drogon's back. The creature growled as he felt her slight weight land on top of him, but he adjusted quickly and showed no indication of discomfort at her presence. Dany settled in amongst the scales and jutting spinal ridges that served as armor for all her children. She adjusted her saddle and, a moment later, she was prepared to leave. A quick look around the clearing confirmed that Egon was already mounted on Viserion. Her nephew looked pensive but eager to be on their way. He was wearing the same form-fitting armor he had worn earlier that day. He returned her look and smiled gamely. Then he lifted his dragon-shaped helm onto his head. His face was now hidden, unreadable. Dany tore her eyes away from her betrothed to find her last remaining dragon. There, lying idly by a large pool of water, was Rorigal. The green dragon lapped lazily at the lake, quenching its thirst after a meal of goat that had been among several dragged into the clearing to feed Dany's children. Rorigal did not look up when Dany called his name, instead remaining focused on the water. "Do not be concerned, Your Grace," Meeryn called up to her. The squat Maester stood with Mokaro by the dragon horn. "Once the battle starts we will use the horn to control him. Never